The story begins with a massive charge of dragons against the human army during a battle, until a trumpet is sounded announcing the appearance of a knight named Madame Dark in golden armor. Madame observes the demons advancing against the soldiers and decides that she will not return until she completes her mission. The soldiers face the demons in separate battles, managing to hold back the monsters' advances. Among these soldiers, there was a knight who was very excited, imagining that his moment to shine had arrived. It is then revealed to us that it was all a game called Over the Fantasy. The player named Kim Jun-woo gets excited when he receives a notification about a major game update. He mentions that they were in the year 203X, where the technology and quality of games had rapidly advanced to the point of reaching the era of virtual reality games. Over the Fantasy is Kim's favorite virtual reality game, even though it is not as popular as other games released alongside it. One of the player's criticisms was the very realistic system, which makes the difficulty a bit high, along with the lack of a pay-to-win system to become stronger in the game, because the only payment in the game would be the initial purchase, and it does not have microtransactions requiring the player to become stronger solely through their own skills. But Kim considers these so-called flaws as qualities that made him completely addicted to the game. When he arrives home, he leans excitedly on his virtual reality device because Over the Fantasy was about to receive its first major update in 3 years. He remembers that the scheduled time for the update was midnight and it was still 7 p.m. With that, he understands that he could take the time to prepare for the update. Kim enters the virtual reality device and starts the game. The iris recognition system recognizes the user and connects him to the game in a lobby-like format, asking him to choose a character to play. Our protagonist acknowledges that people are considered addicted when they have 3 characters at the maximum level. Yet, he already had 7 characters at the maximum level. But Kim decides to choose a different character for these preparations, which would be the character Dio, who did not have a class. Kim remembers that he uses Dio only as a storage character to store items. Upon logging in with the character, he begins to organize his inventory, remembering that a new class would be added and imagining that he could gather items to boost its growth. The problem is that the character he chose had an enormous list of items, causing him to spend a lot of time on it. After all the organization, he approaches the warehouse guard Tony from the village of Avera. Kim notes that it took longer than he thought due to the mess of the items and asks Tony to open the subspace. Tony says it's been a while since he's seen Dio, mentioning that the fee is 1 silver coin. Our protagonist remembers that due to the game's system increasing fees as the character's level rises, players keep a low-level character. At that moment, he notices that he had an item he didn't remember having. He removes the item, which was the lichen kukri knife, thinking that he could keep it in the inventory until he could give it to another character. After that, he notices that he had stored a bad item while the server inspection notification was about to start in 15 minutes. The game's announcements ask players to move to a safe place to log out, and Kim realizes that he spent more than 5 hours organizing everything. However, he believes that he will be automatically disconnected when the update begins and continues organizing his items. Kim also remembers that although Avera Village has an appropriate level of 100, it could still be safe for level 10 characters, as long as they don't leave the village square. When he remembers this, Kim continues his organization, imagining that he needs to hurry, as the server inspection warnings keep appearing. At that moment, the announcements change to an access denied alert and errors start to occur. The system error message mentions that he can no longer send messages, while Kim remains focused on his task. After so much organizing, Kim finally completes his work. He acknowledges that all the work he did was his own fault for storing so many useless items. But at that moment, he notices something strange in his physical sensations. With that, he begins to observe his surroundings and realizes that he is still inside the game, becoming worried. Kim wonders why he hasn't been disconnected even with the update, thinking that perhaps the inspection had been postponed, assuming he hadn't received a notification. But Kim decides that he just needs to manually exit the game and opens the system window, at least until he notices that the logout button is no longer in the system window. With that, he notices that his senses have become sharper, believing that no game would have the capability to apply such realistic sensations. Believing something was wrong, Kim decides to go to the Dimensional Rift. This area is the only place in the game where players can enter cooperative mode, and he runs towards the Dimensional Rift. He believes he should be able to find other users in that location. But upon arriving at the Dimensional Rift, he only finds a massive arch with nothing else. Kim gets irritated, thinking that there should be a portal in that place. At that moment, a boy bumps into Kim and apologizes as he continues on his way. The boy asks why Kim is standing in that spot, and Kim is left speechless. That collision felt too real for a virtual reality game. He wonders if this was still just a game. He believes that this happened due to an error in the game, imagining that he would sue the developers once he managed to log out. Unfortunately, 3 days later, Kim is still trapped and disheartened, having to accept that this game is now his reality, living as a level 10 character. In a military training field, the commander orders them to wield their swords. He asks if the soldiers could defend the city being so inexperienced, while Kim watches from a distance. Our protagonist mentions that he spent 3 days disheartened until he finally accepted the fact that he was immersed in the game. Even so, he is upset, remembering that despite having several max-level characters, he is stuck with a level 10 storage character. His only advantage is that he managed to keep a good amount of money, which he sees as one of his few lucky breaks. At least until he remembers that he is still trapped in the game and completely freaks out. A soldier turns to his character and calls him Sergeant Dio, asking what he was doing there. Dio responds that he was just looking around. A soldier gets excited and asks if he would like to join the training, and Dio hesitates before accepting the request. Kim worries, wondering if he can pass the training with a low-level, classless body, until he decides to ask why the group training was taking place. At that moment, the soldier thinks for a moment and explains that it is because of the waves. It turns out that although Evera Village is a peaceful village for NPCs, they are still attacked by waves of monsters periodically. This happens because it's an in-game event that allows players to fight alongside NPCs to level up much more easily than going to battlefields. The problem is that Evera Village is a level 100 area, while he remains at level 10, which would be a complete disaster. He wonders what he should do, and the soldier calls out to him again. Our protagonist realizes there is no guarantee that dying in the game will disconnect him, so he believes he must do his best. With that, he opens his equipment windows to search his inventory for what he could use. He believes he might have a chance if he acquires a class, and his options at the moment would be Assassin and Martial Arts Master. However, he wouldn't be able to transition into any class with his current attributes. At that moment, he notices another class transition book that makes him very excited. That's because it was a purple-colored book, which means it is the second class transition requiring very little, making him wonder if he could use it. Kim wonders what class it could be, noticing that he had never seen this book before, thinking it might be a hidden treasure in the game he didn't know about. He remembers that the game is more realistic than any other virtual reality game created without any bugs besides the little information given to the players. Although these aspects made the game less user-friendly and drew criticism, Kim saw them as interesting features. The condition for the class transition was to have a reputation above 500 and a low level, which makes him realize it's something unusual and imagine it to be a hidden treasure. Thinking this, Kim understands that the game has secrets he has never uncovered and decides to go after them. After thanking Tony for his help, Kim runs off on his adventure. He heads to the Mercenaries Guild in Evera Village. Upon arriving at the place, he begins to draw attention as he heads towards the guild attendant. The problem is that he irritates a man who complains about him cutting the line. When the man looks at the protagonist's clothes, he realizes this was not a place where he should be. The man wonders what someone so modest was doing in the Mercenaries Guild. Our protagonist throws down a gold medal, requesting to meet the master. The medal was an A-class mercenary plaque, proving that he surpassed veterans, reaching the specialist category. Upon seeing the plaque, the attendant is impressed, while the mercenaries watching from afar are left speechless. He remembers that this plaque represents less than 0.1% of mercenaries, and his plan was to pass himself off as an A-class mercenary with this plaque. With the help of his enchanted disguise hood, he just needed to finish his preparations. Theo starts to fidget under his hood, saying that he had one more thing to show. With that, he pulls out the Imperial emblem he possessed, knowing that he should keep it a secret as it could jeopardize his personal safety. After showing the emblem, he asks again if she could introduce him to the guild master. Although he had completed his part of the plan, he still wonders if it worked, believing they wouldn't challenge him to verify the emblem's authenticity. At that moment, a man appears behind him, acknowledging that a notable person had arrived, introducing himself as Cotton, the branch manager of the Evera Mercenaries Guild. He asks the protagonist if he would like to go upstairs to talk privately. Kim begins to tense up and tries to stay calm, asking again to speak with the master. Cotton mentions that the master is currently absent, saying he could guide him if it's not a problem. With that, he accepts Cotton's offer to guide him instead, and Kim gets excited, as only the negotiation remained. By the end of the day, Dio had shared his plans with Cotton, who tries to confirm his desire to take on a mission at a place called the Forgotten Temple. Dio confirms his desire with a serious and confident look toward Cotton. The manager mentions that there really was a mission to the Forgotten Temple, but he didn't understand why an A-class mercenary would want that mission. He explains that the mission was an escort for a priest, but the spots were already filled. Despite this, Dio shows a mischievous smile, saying not to worry. Our protagonist says he just wants to go with them to the temple. Cotton is surprised by Dio's words, asking if he wanted to join the mission as the escort target. However, Dio quickly clarifies that he doesn't plan to stay idle if something dangerous happens, knowing that this would help his request be accepted. He knew the guild would see this as a reduced chance of mission failure, with no need for additional compensation for the extra help. With that, the manager accepts with a big smile, asking him to review the mission contract, while he informs the client of the changes. At that moment, a window appears notifying him that he has signed up for the mission, and it would activate soon. Afterward, Cotton tells the protagonist to go home and show up at the north exit the next morning. Dio thanks him, thinking it's best to prepare to avoid his identity being discovered. But as he leaves the room, Cotton flashes a malicious smile while watching him. The next day, the group was gathered, discussing the inclusion of the A-class mercenary. When Dio approaches, the group stops talking to prevent him from overhearing. At that moment, one of the group members named Raymond introduces himself to our protagonist. To ensure his identity remains a secret, he asks to be called Monty. His plan was moving forward despite an unforeseen variable of having only 4 members in the team. Our protagonist begins to suspect that they reduced the number of members due to having an A-class mercenary among them, which makes him irritated for being deceived. With that, Raymond notices that the client hasn't arrived yet. At that moment, a young girl comes running, asking if they were the mercenaries that would be escorting her to the temple. They mention that they were waiting for her to arrive, and the girl tries to catch her breath. The girl named Clara is a priestess from the Temple of the Moon, who had been tasked with a mission to reach the Forgotten Temple. As Raymond introduces himself to Clara, Kim observes her, noticing that her outfit was a bit dirty, understanding that she had likely been through a lot, until she turns to the protagonist and he realizes she is staring at him. She shrinks back and Kim believes she thinks he looks suspicious. Even so, he understands that since A-class mercenaries are rare, she might be intrigued by him, and the group gathers to set out on their journey. As they leave the city, Kim receives a notification that he is entering an area far above his level. At night, they begin planning how to proceed, thinking they could reach Camp 2 the next day. Even though it's a detour, it would be safer. They believe it's the safest option, but Kim disagrees, suggesting they take a shortcut. Kim mentions that if they head to Camp 3, there's a hidden cave that would allow them to reach the temple much faster. However, Raymond gets irritated, saying that they know the area better than him and that the path to Camp 3 hasn't been fully explored. Our protagonist insists he can find the way better than they can, claiming it's much faster if they go through the cave and cross the Dunville forest. This comment further irritates Raymond because of the monsters in the Dunville region. The problem is that Kim has his reasons, which he can't reveal to avoid compromising his identity. He remembers that despite being a level 10 character without a class, he must act with courage and determination. Kim declares that they should take the path to Camp 3, as the priest's health is the priority, and they should seek the quickest route. With a more firm and serious tone, he says he's not there to play around, questioning why they should waste more time when they could get there faster via another route. Still, he understands how ridiculous it seems, as he's the outsider on the mission trying to give orders. To avoid further problems, he asks Clara if it's okay, making her reluctantly agree. Clara mentions that it might be good to follow Kim's advice to move faster, and that they could use Raymond's route on the way back for safety. Raymond reluctantly agrees, warning that if the situation becomes dangerous, it will be Kim's responsibility to handle it. Kim confidently assures them not to worry, as he knows he made the right choice. The next morning, they continue on their way, while Kim feels the aches from sleeping on the hard ground. He realizes that if it were just a game, he could have recovered by simply sleeping. But since this game has become his reality, he feels more exhausted than refreshed. Raymond tries to confirm if they're really heading toward a cave, and Kim explains they mustn't stray off the path, as it's the werewolves' territory. The problem is that at that moment, Raymond starts to veer off the path, leaving Kim confused. Raymond turns irritated, saying he's checking something, and Kim notices he's still resentful over what happened the previous night. Our protagonist thinks this might be a good chance to make them start trusting him and asks Clara if it wouldn't be a good idea to rest for a bit. After some time resting, they hear a scream and receive a notification that a group member is bleeding as Raymond appears running from a wolf. Kim lets out a slight smile, saying he had warned them to be careful. One of the other team members urges Kim to help them quickly, but the protagonist responds that they should handle it themselves for not listening to his warning. The mercenaries become irritated by his comment, questioning if he is really a mercenary. Kim tells Clara to stay behind him as he watches the mercenaries fight. They engage in battle with the wolves and manage to show considerable strength, even though they are D-class. At that moment, 2 wolves lunge at Raymond, while Kim sees one of the wolves completely wounded. Kim realizes he needs to act to avoid appearing as though his A-class title is just for show. Our protagonist pulls out a staff, saying he should provide support to the 3, and Clara agrees. He noticed that the mercenaries had the skill to defeat up to 2 wolves, but it would be difficult to finish the fight without injuries if they didn't know a specific skill. At that moment, he steps past the mercenaries and tells them to step back. Raymond glares at him, annoyed, saying it's no big deal since Kim waited for the group to weaken the wolves before deciding to appear. Kim tells him he's mistaken, just as the wolf's eyes glow. With that, the wolf charges at them and manages to break through the mercenary's shield, prompting Kim to warn that it's dangerous. As the wolf lunges at him, Kim strikes it with his weapon, forcing it to back off. The wolf is stunned by Kim's blow, unable to react, and then simply collapses unconscious to the ground. At that moment, Kim imagines that, in the mercenary's eyes, he did something incredible by defeating the wolf with a single blow. But in reality, eagle-type monsters usually go into a frenzy right before death, which can neutralize a significant amount of damage. Kim's tactic was simply using a purification elixir applied to his weapon to neutralize the wolf's rage. He recognizes that, thanks to his knowledge of monsters' traits and attack patterns, the level difference between them wouldn't be an issue for him. He knew well the wolves' attack patterns and could easily dodge them. Once he created enough distance, he would just need to charge forward and land a powerful blow to the head to end the fight. With that strike, the wolf would be stunned for 5 seconds from the impact. This would allow him to deal more damage to his enemy, and he prepared to do just that. Kim delivers a direct blow to the wolf's chin, shattering its jaw and defeating it. He knew that he had already won after stopping the frenzy and only delivered the second strike for show. But he also knew that this only worked because the wolf was weak. Under normal circumstances, that blow wouldn't have caused much damage. Our protagonist returns to the group thanking Clara and saying he was indebted to the employer. He then asks Raymond how he's doing while taking responsibility for choosing the dangerous path. Raymond, embarrassed, admits that part of it was his fault as well, acknowledging the protagonist's abilities. Kim realizes that everything was going according to his plan to gain the group's trust. Later that night, they gather around a campfire and Raymond admits that it was wise to listen to Kim's advice, saying it was surprising that a cave existed in that location. Kim says that anyone can be a guide, but they ask him not to be modest, urging him to share his adventure stories once the mission is over. Though Kim is pleased with their trust, he still feels that it could be problematic and reminds them that the mission isn't over yet. He explains that the cave is safe and that they can spend the night there, only needing to decide the watch order among them. With that settled, Kim is excited that his plan is unfolding as expected. However, one thing still worries him: the major game update. Even with 7 max-level characters and the entire game stored in his memory, it could all become useless depending on what the update brings. Still, he believes he can handle whatever problems arise. A tree monster attempts to attack the group, but Kim defeats it completely, earning more praise from the group. They didn't know that he had used an alchemically made plant disease remedy on his weapon. The issue with all this is that he's losing all the experience he could gain due to not having gone through the class change. At that moment, one of the monsters attacks again, even after being poisoned, forcing the mercenary to defend with his shield. Kim explains to the mercenaries how to deal with the monster, telling them to dodge instead of blocking the attack, and advising Raymond to take advantage of the monster's weakened state to finish the fight. Raymond gets excited, recognizing Kim's skill, and Kim realizes he hasn't lost his habit of instinctively giving advice. After walking a bit through the fields, Kim wonders if he is close to what he's looking for, which catches Clara's attention. He then finds a hole with a bright light that grabs his attention. One of the mercenaries asks if he plans to enter such a narrow hole, and Kim replies that it would be a shortcut to the temple. At that moment, the mercenaries start wondering if they could fit through the hole. Our protagonist warns Clara to be careful as he extends his hand to guide her, and she accepts, slightly embarrassed. He tells her they are about to fall, asking her not to be scared, leaving her quite confused. With that, he jumps into the hole, holding Clara's hand as she clutches her skirt. When they land on the ground, Clara sits, trying to understand what just happened. She looks around and notices the space, realizing it was a temple-like area, while Kim continues walking. She mentions that she didn't realize there was so much space in that hole as she gazes at the murals. Kim recognizes the murals from the mission records, saying they represent the flow and clues of the main story. The murals depict the confrontation between the demon mason, who follows the origin of chaos, and the moon goddess Luna. Meanwhile, Raymond begins observing another part of the temple, wondering if it's a painting or some kind of ritual. But in reality, it was a knighthood ceremony with a knight being appointed. This mural makes Kim feel uneasy, and he pulls Raymond away, realizing that the mural is different from the ones he's familiar with. At that moment, Kim remembers the dragons and the golden knight that had been introduced in the game's update trailer. He mentions that this seemed like a prophecy, and Clara says it was the first time she had seen that secret corridor, despite having seen so many images in the temple. Our protagonist remembers that she is a priestess of the Luna sect and asks what is written on the mural. Clara explains that although the sacred language is no longer used, she would try to decipher the texts. She begins translating, saying that the text starts with "at the end of the world," making Kim realize what that phrase means. It was the first verse of the song from the trailer, and he understands that the temple they are heading to will have a new event he has never seen before. Even though he feels it might be terrifying, he knows he must move forward, as it's the only way to survive in this world. Kim calls the group to head towards the temple, observing the temple's structures, and everyone is amazed when they finally reach the Forgotten Temple. At that moment, he spots the statue of the knight that appeared in the painting, and Clara is impressed by the beauty of the statue. Kim wonders if the statue might move. Clara tries to calm Kim, saying that the sect confirmed there was no danger, though it doesn't ease his nerves. Since this was a new NPC appearing, he couldn't help but feel concerned about the changes. He knows that their current power level won't help at all if an enemy appears. When they enter the temple, a notification appears that they have entered the Forgotten Temple for the first time. With that, the mission condition to escort the priest is confirmed, and Clara thanks everyone for their help. Kim knows that the next part will be his original goal, the class change. At that moment, the book opens again in front of Kim, stating that the conditions have been met, activating by itself, which surprises him. Clara becomes worried, asking what's happening as the statue begins to move. It then shatters, revealing a knight hidden within, causing Raymond to panic. Our protagonist observes him and realizes that this is not a guardian, it's a dark knight. It's a cursed holy knight known as the Death Knight, even giving trouble to level 300 players. The knight's eyes glow and Kim feels excited, remembering that monsters that appear in level 100 areas are like this. At that moment, the knight begins walking toward the group, while Kim realizes that defeating him alone might not be enough to fulfill the mission's objective. He remembers that the game often hides its true intentions within each event, thinking there might be other ways to handle the situation. Suddenly, the book activates again, revealing that he possesses the class change book and has triggered a hidden mission. Upon touching the book, he receives a mission to obtain the Death Knight's sword, making Kim feel relieved. This is because he remembers a forum post explaining a simple way to defeat the Death Knight by exploiting his unusual weakness to sacred powers. The plan would be to bring a priest and have them use a shield on the knight, as it would confuse him, causing him to break the shield and skip phase 1 of the fight. Kim looks at Clara, knowing that she will be crucial to this strategy, just as the area around them begins to catch fire. At that moment, the knight begins speaking, asking how they dare set foot in the sanctuary. Clara grows worried, saying that this could be very dangerous, and Kim turns to her. He asks her to prepare the sacred shield, believing that the trigger for the event might have been the class change book. He also speculates that the condition for the event could be being below level 10 and without a class. Kim's request startles Clara, who says they don't stand a chance of winning and that he can't fight. But Kim grips her shoulders, telling her there's no way to escape, and urges her to cast the sacred shield on the knight. Kim insists she must act before the knight makes the first move, while she glances nervously at the enemy behind them. Clara begins trembling with fear until she manages to control herself and starts casting her magic. At that moment, as she begins to use her magic, the knight raises his sword to attack them, prompting Kim to hold her staff to help her. Our protagonist encourages her, and Clara successfully casts the sacred shield on the knight, trapping him. She is amazed to see that she could use the shield in such a way, wondering who Kim really is. But he tells her it's still too soon to let their guard down, as the knight has only lost his sword and begins gathering energy in his hand. Kim feels excited, realizing that their strategy is working, and that they've reached phase 2 of the battle, as the knight starts summoning multiple swords. As the swords fall around them, Clara grows even more worried, saying that things were becoming more dangerous. Our protagonist yells at the knight, asking if he doesn't recognize him, and a notification appears, stating that the conditions have been fulfilled. He remembers that in any game, a Dark Knight is not just a regular enemy, and this game is no exception. A notification mentions that a dialogue room has been activated, prompting Kim to mention that Phase 2 can be altered into a conversation if a story related to the player is triggered. At that moment, he realizes that all the clues for the mission were in the game trailer. This is because the trailer introduced the paladin in golden armor named Dark, who had been waiting for Pavel, who had gone to seek reinforcements. However, since Pavel didn't return, Dark became a Death Knight, while Pavel likely became a wandering ghost capable of delivering the Imperial Medal. Upon recognizing the entire connection behind the story, Kim shows the Imperial Medal and calls the knight by the name Dark, saying that he had completed the mission and had arrived. With that, the knight kneels and gazes at the protagonist, saying that he had worked hard. Our protagonist feels relieved, realizing that he had been recognized as an ally of the knight, who was revealed to be Adelia Dark, the first paladin knight of the old Holy Kingdom of Adelia. Adelia explains that much time has passed and they were defeated, losing their god in the process. She explains that the wait had been long and lists her fallen comrades until one name cannot be heard, which makes Kim curious about that name. Kim suspects that he hasn't fulfilled all the conditions of the mission, wondering what might be missing, while Adelia says that he has restored her hope. At that moment, Adelia raises her sword and places it on Kim's shoulder, which he recognizes as the knighthood ceremony depicted in the mural. With this, he recalls another verse from the trailer's song, which makes him feel uneasy. He realizes that he had overlooked something from the trailer and wonders if Adelia had been waiting for more than just reinforcements, and if she might be longing for her beloved. Our protagonist begins to wonder what might be missing, as he knows there should be a clue now that the event has been triggered. Thinking that it might have something to do with the person Adelia was waiting for, he believes he has an idea of what it could be. He recalls that his A-class mercenary insignia was obtained at the Sanctuary of Tardo, which is related to an ancient divine kingdom. Kim imagines that this isn't a coincidence, as game updates often add more uses for existing items. He tells Adelia that she had been waiting for someone even after becoming a Death Knight and shows her the insignia, asking if it belonged to that person. Adelia drops her sword to the ground as her armor disintegrates, and a notification appears, stating that Adelia's weight has granted qualification for the path of truth. At that moment, she begins wondering if Passus would still love her, even if she starves to death or decays and rots away. Kim has no answer while she continues her thoughts, saying that his soul touched and saved her. Our protagonist admits that he is not the person she was waiting for, saying that he only collected her belongings. Still, Adelia knows the truth and reaches for the insignia, asking that her beloved be sent to paradise. When she finally receives the insignia, Adelia is purified as she cries tears of joy for being able to send her beloved to paradise. At that moment, several notifications appear, confirming that the mission has been completed, awarding various rewards and beginning the reconfiguration of the user's status. Kim's hands start to disintegrate, making him scream in pain as Adelia is covered by an intense light. Some time passes and Kim wakes up in his bed, recognizing that he has returned to his apartment. He wonders if it was all just a dream and thinks that the game couldn't have become reality. At that moment, he imagines that everything was just a dream. Kim begins to regret coming back as he can faintly hear someone calling for him. Clara calls out his name, bringing Kim back to reality as he wakes up in their campsite tent. Clara is relieved to see that he's okay, while Kim feels a bit disappointed that it wasn't just a dream. When the group discovers that he's awake, they all gather excitedly. Everyone starts celebrating that Kim is alive, saying that they believe he would be able to capture that monster. But Kim remembers that they all ran away as soon as the night appeared, saying he just wants to get some rest. The group leaves the tent, leaving Kim to analyze the items he received, noticing that Adelia's soul sword had a special restriction marked on it. He remembers that, although he expected changes, they were quite intense, thinking that the key point in this update would be this ancient holy kingdom. Feeling frustrated, he realizes that the advantage of knowing the game's information no longer exists, and he would need to be more cautious to avoid unnecessary risks. As he leaves the tent, Clara comes to check on him, asking if he's alright. Kim tells her to continue the mission with the mercenaries as he had some things to resolve at the altar. When he moves away from the group, Kim pulls out the book, saying he no longer needs to hesitate about making the class change. He recognizes that the energy Adelia had given him and her sword had fulfilled the requirements of the book he possessed. A notification appears, stating that he has successfully changed his class to Forgotten Swordsman, gaining several levels thanks to accumulated points. Our protagonist realizes this is a new class in the game, which leaves him feeling disappointed, thinking he had expected too much. Clara follows him, calling him to return to the village as they had completed the mission. She asks if something is wrong, and he replies that it's just things in his head, urging them to return quickly. Upon returning to Avra village, Raymond acknowledges that he has grown stronger through the A-class mercenary training. At that moment, Raymond invites them to the guild to collect their rewards. Kim declines, saying he hadn't asked for any rewards anyway. However, Clara insists that even though he didn't request compensation, the Luna Order would offer a reward for the mission due to its special circumstances. Raymond tries to invite Kim for a drink, leaving Kim curious about how he's being treated so familiarly, while the protagonist acknowledges how much he's improved. Kim realizes he needs to keep his distance because of his identity, telling them he has other matters to take care of. Everyone feels a bit down from his comment, and Kim finally feels relaxed enough to remove his hood. But he remembers that he needs to quickly prepare for the upcoming monster wave, as that was the reason for his class change despite the risks. When Kim opens his status window, he begins to analyze his new class stats. He recognizes that he didn't know much about the class he acquired during the battle, suspecting it might be connected to the knight Adelia. He believes this happened due to the red energy he received from the knight. At that moment, he tries to relax, recalling the other classes he had evolved with his other characters. The only difference this time is that everything is real, and he focuses on evolving his class for the impending monster wave. To ensure what he can do, he reviews the skills he gained from the class promotion. He notices a skill called Oath of Liberation. He believes this skill could be risky to use, as it might be quite useless if it doesn't work on weak targets. The other skill he sees is Slash, which simply states that it's a technique to deal damage with a sword. Kim becomes frustrated with the lack of utility in this skill, until he is suddenly enveloped by a reddish light, with a notification saying that the skill changes according to the player's state. Our protagonist stares at the energy, thinking it might be the energy he received from Adelia, while contemplating the information he was given. At that moment, a notification appears stating that the energy has recognized the Seal of Wrath, and that the Slash skill has fused and changed. Afterward, he looks back at his status window, seeing that the Wrath form has been marked with the effect of Slash. He imagines that the skill has become stronger, realizing that his class is a growth type as the skills evolve. One of the conditions for further evolving his skill is a fire essence, and Kim remembers that he has one stored in another city's warehouse. He decides to focus on leveling up, aiming to reach at least level 50 before the monster wave arrives. Our protagonist follows his plan, facing high-level turtle monsters to increase his level. Since they are slow monsters, he takes advantage of this, dodging their attacks and targeting weak points to finish them off faster. When the turtle tries to attack Kim, he dodges and lands a direct blow to the monster's neck, recognizing that overcoming the level difference is quite easy. By defeating such a high-level enemy, he gains a lot of experience, acknowledging his skills from having evolved his other characters. Still, he notices that things would be much easier if he had a better weapon, as he's relying on a basic store-bought sword due to level limitations. Kim finds himself depending heavily on repetitive grinding to evolve his skills, wondering who still does this sort of thing in games today. After much training against the turtles, he finally reaches level 50, already exhausted and surrounded by defeated turtle monsters. With this, he acknowledges that his preparations were almost complete, with only collecting the items from his warehouse left. He He observes the warning window about the monster wave, noticing that it was nearing its start. Meanwhile, the soldiers plan their preparations for the wave, setting up the fence to protect themselves from the monsters. When the monsters approach, the archer soldiers are already prepared to attack the incoming wave. The attack begins by focusing on the monsters that are getting close to the city walls. As the monsters start getting hit, they continue advancing, prompting the knights to arrange their shields, forming the third line of defense. After the shield line disbands, the soldiers rush towards the monsters to finish off the nearest enemies. At that moment, the commander continues giving orders when a figure appears beside him, charging into the battlefield. It was Kim, who strikes one of the monsters, leaving the commander surprised. They recognize the protagonist as the A-rank mercenary Monty, happy for the help they've received in the battle. The commander thanks Monty for his help, mentioning that he had become quite famous recently, suspecting that he might be familiar, which makes Monty concerned. Then he remembers that he had encountered this commander in the past while standing in front of the training grounds. At that moment, the commander asks if he hadn't met Monty before, and he makes up an excuse to throw him off. Ignoring all of this, the commander expresses his happiness for having the support of an A-rank mercenary. He mentions that his elite soldiers would assist him, and Kim thanks him for the help, while recalling that the monsters in the wave are at least twice the level. His advantage was finding a way to deal with the issue of fatal blows by using an item called the Lens of Certainty. When he faces the monsters, he can see their health levels, allowing him to focus on enemies that are dying to land the final blow. Our protagonist continues the battle, taking down all the monsters, while the soldiers are impressed by his skill and composure. At that moment, Kim thinks he's not doing anything that remarkable, as he's just focusing on the enemies with low health. He remembers that he doesn't earn experience if he doesn't kill the monsters himself, unlike what happened during the Forgotten Temple mission. Despite a monster trying to strike Kim from behind, he manages to dodge and hit it, with the soldiers being impressed by his use of the sword for piercing attacks. When he sees a low-health wolf charging at 2 weak soldiers, he believes he can't miss the chance to kill it. Using a leaf to whistle and provoke it, Kim charges at it, striking the wolf in the back and leveling up again. At that moment, the soldier tries to thank him for the help, but he pushes him aside to avoid the attack of another monster. With several experience notifications popping up, Kim complains, saying it's annoying, and the soldier thinks the protagonist is complaining about him. Then a loud cry for help arises, making Kim notice a group of insect monsters with less than 10% health, which excites him as he charges towards them. Our protagonist simply continues attacking each of the monsters, leaving the soldiers confused as to why he was attacking so carelessly, with shallow strikes. He lets a slight smile escape before making all the monsters explode, leaving everyone stunned, believing he was a mage for using magic. After defeating the monsters, the soldiers assume the rumor about him having an Imperial Honor medal might be true. Kim recalls when he achieved Proficiency 100 with his class, unlocking an ability called Mark, which confused him. The warning window explains that the marks are used to fix a mark on an enemy and cause a slash as an additional effect, making Kim more excited. At that moment, he understands that he could make up to 5 targets explode after being touched by his sword. He remembers that explosion abilities usually affect the user too, until he had an idea to use this technique with the help of an item from his inventory. It turns out he was wearing a salamander armor set that increased his fire resistance, allowing him not to be affected. With that, he continues his battle, striking the other enemies and causing explosions in the foes ahead, taking advantage of the fire weakness of the insect-type monsters. Suddenly, a giant monster appears, surprising Kim as it was a level 150 guillotine bear. Kim notices it was a named monster, which usually has much higher levels than the area's average, motivating players to hide. The problem is that with all this skill in battle, it makes the soldiers say they should trust Monty to handle the monster. He even says that he wouldn't like to receive such special treatment despite planning to face it anyway. At that moment, the bear charges at Kim, who dodges the attack, landing a blow on the monster's face. Our protagonist knows that despite seeming random, the bear's attacks follow a predefined pattern. At the same time, he remembers that the explosion damage wouldn't affect him due to the enemy's thick skin. With this, Kim decides to change tactics, running into the crowd of enemies, needing to dodge and taking the opportunity to strike them. His plan is to make the other enemies hit the guillotine bear, which continues chasing him, unaware that it's being killed by the others. After running for a while, Kim stops and turns, showing a glowing bottle that he throws at the bear's head. While the enemy tries to understand what happened, Kim activates the mark, causing it to ignite from the explosion caused by his previous strike. With that, the bear simply falls defeated in front of Kim, who is then cheered by the soldiers. The surviving monsters are stunned by his victory, and Kim lowers his sword, staring at the monsters. He then charges at the survivors to finish off the rest of the monster wave. Some time passes, and we see a carriage moving through the fields with Kim resting inside, until the carriage is stopped by a guard for a quick inspection. At that moment, he meets Monty, calling him a monster hunter, making Monty look at him with a tired gaze. The soldier mentions having heard about his actions in the village, asking if he's heading to Libranos. After that, the soldier says he's looking forward to working with him again, and Kim only responds awkwardly. Our protagonist realized he had become more famous than expected as he reached the plains of Paramount, remembering that he had reached level 80. He acknowledges that it was a good idea to have unlocked the mark ability. His current desire was to obtain the essence of fire that he had stored in Libranos along with other items that might be useful once he reaches level 100. Kim starts to recall what else needed to be done and decides to ask the coachman if any rumors had been spreading throughout the Empire. The coachman then recalls that about 10 days ago, a group of bandits started a rebellion in the western regions, leading the third prince to try to resolve the issue. It turns out that the protagonist remembered this mission, having completed it with another character, discovering that this mission allows the establishment of ties with Prince Prion. Another rumor that the coachman recalls is that many people have been disappearing in Libranos, causing trouble for the Lord. Upon hearing this, he begins to understand the timeline he's following in that location. Kim thanks him for the information and asks to be dropped off along the way, leaving the coachman confused. He realizes that constantly hiding his identity was becoming quite exhausting as the carriage moves away. But the reason he stops in the middle of the plains is that he remembered a hidden mission nearby. In that location, there was a cave used by a slave trafficker, part of one of the most despicable gangs in the game. These traffickers are the real reason behind the disappearances in the city of Libranos. Even so, Kim mentions that he isn't doing this for justice, but rather for the agility elixir that he can obtain after defeating the boss. After disguising himself with his hood, he overhears two guards at the cave talking about how the recent auction had gone successfully. The guards are excited about this, imagining they could rest and saying they could get drunk without worrying. Kim prepares a rope and quickly loops it around one of the guards' necks to pull him in. Then he surprises the two and at the same time throws the tied guard off a nearby cliff. With that, the other guard tries to raise the alarm about an intruder, only to be killed with a single blow from the protagonist. Our protagonist recognizes that the enemies were probably around level 50, so there was no need to use his abilities. He looks at the entrance, where a cage with a bird stands, and he frees it, telling it not to get caught by people like these again. At that moment, inside the hideout, the bandits are wondering why the traffickers are paying so much. Their boss doesn't care as long as they get paid, making one bandit ask if they won't be hunted by the citizens of Libranos. Still, the boss says the nobles wouldn't use their own money to search the plains to try to find them. Suddenly, a loud noise can be heard, and a barrel comes rolling towards the boss. Then the bandit asks who is showing such disrespect towards their boss. Kim appears smiling, asking if he hasn't drunk enough until an arm appears coming out of the barrel. Seeing this, the bandits become worried and attack Kim, who simply dodges their blows, hitting one of them. While dodging the second bandit's blow, Kim lands a direct hit on him, leaving the boss impressed. The boss trembles upon seeing his men dead, while Kim informs him that he has already dealt with the others, leaving only the boss. After this, the boss tries to escape from Kim, crawling away while injured, saying he only did what was asked of him. Our protagonist remembers that they deserve this fate, although he doesn't feel good about the situation, wondering if he has ever shown mercy to his victims. With this, he kills the boss and obtains a key to open a treasure chest. When he opens the chest, Kim receives the agility elixir, which permanently increases his attribute. Kim drinks the elixir, feeling his exhaustion disappear, even though that's not exactly the effect. But as Kim plans to continue his journey, he hears a voice calling from behind the walls. He remembers that the slave auction had already ended, so there shouldn't be anyone left there. However, he hears the voice again and begins to try to trace the source along the wall. In doing so, Kim finds a secret passage leading to several cages, where they kept malnourished victims. Our protagonist feels sick from the rotten smell, imagining that he is more relaxed because he had already experienced this in the game. If it were his first time, it might have traumatized him. At the end of the cave, he finds a wooden door. When he opens it, Kim finds a woman trapped atop a magical circle. Kim recognizes the place, while the woman notices that he has entered the room, making her ask him to kill her. But Kim notices that this woman is named Sepia, and that she is an extra character meant to be used as a human sacrifice in a ritual by one of the bandits. It turns out that Sepia is the sister of the chief of the Knight's Court, Sigmund, who would awaken after her death, becoming the Judgment Knight of the Church of the Moon. At this moment, he reflects that Sepia's death is important to the main plot of the game, remembering that despite players wanting to save her, they never could. This is because Sepia was cursed with the death stigma, which prevents any magic or potion from being used on her, making her a character destined only to die. She asks again to be killed, while Kim realizes he might be able to find a way to save her. Our protagonist opens his skills window, recalling the Oath of Liberation, which mentions it could remove abnormal effects from a target. Although not entirely sure if this would break the death stigma, he still believes it is possible. The problem is that using the oath would make him lose 10% of his stats, causing Kim to wonder if the risk is worth it to make her his subordinate. At that moment, he has an epiphany, remembering that even though she was originally a game character, at this moment, she's a real girl suffering before him. He recalls finishing off the bandits and says that he is not a monster like the traffickers he killed. Then he kneels in front of Sepia, saying that he could save her, ending her curse, and asks what her wish would be. Sepia is shocked for a moment, then decides to accept his offer, holding his hand, activating the Oath of Liberation. A window appears, warning that the oath could fail if he didn't have enough vitality to end her abnormal state, asking if he wishes to proceed. Upon accepting, a bright light shines in front of them, with a notice that he has fulfilled the conditions for the hidden mission Save Sepia. When Kim manages to open his eyes, recalling what happened, he finds himself in a completely destroyed scenario. A horde of monsters appears, confronting an army of soldiers in golden armor. Kim observes the battle, thinking it's the first time he's seen this type of armor, and watches as another monster appears, believing the humans would lose the fight. Once again, an intense light comes from the skies, with a woman descending from above. This woman looks to the side, observing Kim and blessing him in the process. After that, Kim wakes up desperately back in the cave with Sepia unconscious as he reflects on the scene he saw, wondering if it has some connection to Sepia. Associating this vision with Sepia, Kim suspects that she is not just any NPC until he sees the rewards for completing the mission to save her. Several contract notifications appear, with a window asking if he would like to form the oath, and he confirms once again. Upon completing the oath, a window appears, indicating that it would start neutralizing the curse. His vitality begins to gradually decrease, while Sepia slowly recovers. However, when his vitality drops below 10%, Kim starts feeling unwell, beginning to cough up blood. He realizes he had been too careless as he feels the pain from his decreasing vitality. At that moment, Sepia wakes up, feeling the pain disappear as the energy surrounding her becomes quite comforting, seeing Kim trembling in pain and bleeding. Sepia wonders why he was going to such lengths to save her. Kim receives the notification that the mission was completed and the Oath of Liberation leveled up. He is furious with the pain, even ignoring the level up. But after that, he grabs Sepia's wrist to carry her out of the cave and take her to a safe place. At that moment, Sepia faints again, dreaming of being in an empty place until someone approaches. She believes it's her brother until he extends his hand to Sepia, making her realize that, although it wasn't her brother because he didn't have silver hair, she wasn't afraid of him. Sepia wakes up desperately, trying to remember what happened, noticing that she no longer felt any pain and wondering when was the last time she felt so comfortable. With that, she looks ahead and sees Kim lying down, completely stained with blood with some containers in front of him. The girl wonders why he worked so hard to save her, imagining that this warrior might be a messenger from her brother. But she notices that he didn't seem like one of Libernos's knights, besides using a different weapon and having no scars. When Kim wakes up, Sepia is only a few centimeters away from his face, making her back away in embarrassment. Kim realizes he had dozed off and introduces himself to her as Dio, extending his hand. Sepia introduces herself while thanking him for saving her life, asking how he found her and whether he had received a request from her brother. At this moment, Kim remembers that he has almost no information about Sepia, as she usually dies at the beginning of the game. He believes that if he pretends to know her or her brother, it could cause a lot of trouble in the future, so he decides to ask who her brother is. The problem is that Sepia wonders why he sacrificed so much to save someone he didn't know, and Kim realizes he will have to improvise. Kim says he would like to hear her thanks. Sepia doesn't understand this, making Kim think he was too direct. Even though Kim talks with her for a while, she doesn't seem to remember the oath they made in the cave. Still, she has become his subordinate, making Kim think that there must be some restrictions on her actions. At that moment, he notices that her information window has subordination characteristics. He recognizes that she will feel pain if she disobeys his orders or stays too far from him, and that Sepia will die if the oath is broken. Kim realizes the restrictions were much worse than he expected, although he remembers she would have died if the oath hadn't been made. With this, he understands that he needs to explain the situation calmly to avoid worrying her, so he asks about her brother. Despite Kim asking to return to the city of Libernos, Sepia avoids looking at him, still suspicious of him. Since they don't know each other yet, Kim understands that she doesn't see him as much different from the slave traders. At this moment, he extends his hand, asking her to take it, leaving her confused. With that, he says it's an order, and Sepia immediately holds his hand, making her even more confused by what happened. Kim takes the opportunity to explain that they are bound by the oath which made her his subordinate. He explains the conditions of the oath, already warning that it wasn't intentional, and that he had no other choice to save her life. Our protagonist understands that she wouldn't be happy about having to follow him, especially knowing that even when she finds her brother, she will still be forced to stay with him. But at that moment, he receives a notification that her trust increased by 3 points, leaving him impressed. Sepia says that she owes her life to him, asking Dio to take care of her. Kim is pleased that she was so easy to persuade, calling her to head back to Libernos. Meanwhile, a bandit forces his subordinate to repeat the message he received, asking if the sacrifice had disappeared. The subordinate replies that when he arrived at the hideout, the bandits were dead, and before he could finish, he is bound in chains by the leader. He is outraged, asking if he knew how valuable that sacrifice was while crushing the subordinate with his chains. Originally, the plan was to use her out of hatred for her brother, Sigmund, but later he realized the potential she had to surpass a great mage. If he could have used her as a sacrifice, he imagines he could have gained many levels of power, causing him to lose his mind. With that, the leader slams his subordinate to the ground, while another subordinate informs him that they found Sepia, as she hadn't gone far from the cave. Upon hearing this, the leader orders his subordinates to follow, as he would personally deal with the one who dared to take her from him. At this moment, Kim realizes that they weren't making much progress due to Sepia's condition, which makes him worried. Sepia asks if he considered himself a wandering mercenary, wanting to know more about his abilities. Kim notices that she is asking quite a lot after regaining some of her energy, making him respond that he just gained this power from a random temple. But this answer causes her trust to decrease by 1 point, which worries him. He asks why she had been captured, causing her to shrink back and ask if that was in order. Kim realizes it's a complicated matter and tells her she doesn't need to share if she doesn't want to, making her find Kim cute and increasing her trust once again. Sepia says she has no reason to find fault in the person who saved her. But at that moment, Kim pulls her close to him, causing her to worry, while Kim tells her to look behind her. A smoldering mark can appear, and Sepia recognizes the sinister energy emanating from it. At that moment, the bandit leader appears, saying that Kim was nobody, as he observes the two of them with his subordinates. Our protagonist recognizes the leader named Victor, which surprises him. Victor assumes Kim must have only recognized his mark on the ground. Victor complains about Kim for stealing Sepia, making Kim sarcastically apologize for taking her without permission with a smirk. With that, he throws stakes at the group of bandits with a mark, saying it was something to make up for it. He activates his mark, causing the subordinates to catch fire as he asks if they were even now. With this, Victor considers Kim quite interesting, while Kim assumes he survived the attack because he had reached the 3rd circle. Kim realizes that Victor would only have reached the 5th circle if he had sacrificed Sepia, keeping him at the 3rd circle, which means he is at a similar level. Our protagonist understands that he can defeat him, while dodging an attack from Victor and advancing on his enemies. One of the subordinates realizes that Kim is stronger than he appeared, only to be caught off guard and struck with a direct hit. To avoid taking too much damage, another subordinate activates a shield, while Kim prepares for a second attack. His shield shatters as Kim takes down another subordinate. At that moment, the remaining subordinates prepare to use their magic to protect Victor, who is preparing an attack. But Kim once again throws a stake with his mark, causing more enemies to catch fire. Now there are 3 enemies left that Kim takes out one by one until he reaches Victor. Victor seizes the moment to cast his Eternal Curse spell, which would chase Kim to the ends of the earth, guaranteeing his victory. However, Kim hides behind yet another subordinate, causing him to take the curse instead, with Kim thanking him for taking the curse on his behalf. Our protagonist recognizes the qualities of the targeting effect while mocking Victor, calling him Old Black Magic Grandpa. With that, Victor loses his composure, emanating an intense energy. Kim charges at him, saying that light magic wouldn't work now as his casting speed was slow due to still being at the 3rd circle mage level. Victor concentrates his magic, saying that he could have reached the 7th circle if he had completed his sacrifice. But Kim remarks that his limit would be the 5th circle with a disappointed look as Victor attempts to launch a spell at him. At that moment, Kim throws one of his subordinates back at Victor while activating the mark again. This blow sets the subordinate ablaze along with Victor. Kim approaches Victor, saying it was time to end this fight. However, at that moment, he senses something dangerous about Victor, noticing the flames around his body, knowing the fire shouldn't be moving that way. Sepia starts crying, making Kim worry, and when he turns to Earth, Sepia is on fire and in a trance-like state. Our protagonist becomes alarmed by this, watching as Sepia, in an uncontrollable state, uses a spell to launch chains at Victor, telling him he should feel the pain for himself. Her chains bind Victor, and Sepia gives a cruel smile while setting Victor on fire as he begs for mercy. Kim is astonished by the magic Sepia is using. That's because this magic possessed an ego, a power that only endgame NPCs had, with only a few high-ranking characters having a chance to possess it. He realizes that the fact Sepia has this type of magic could mean something important, but Sepia faints from using her power, causing him to worry about her. He notices that she doesn't have full control over this power, and he wonders if she might be able to if he makes the right decisions. At that moment in Libranos, Vice Captain Sigmund receives an important message. The soldiers had found traces of Sepia at the border, initially thinking they were from slave traffickers, which enrages Sigmund. He grows angry, ordering his soldiers to eliminate them all, while continuing to lament his sister's disappearance. Meanwhile, the protagonist and Sepia continue their path to Libranos, with her wondering if they were going the right way. Kim says he knows a shortcut to Libranos, which slightly irritates her. He notices that she has returned to distrusting him, although he doesn't know why, as he's been navigating perfectly without using a map or compass. Knowing he could lose her trust if he keeps making excuses, he prefers to remain silent. Still, he keeps thinking about what happened, considering her a defenseless girl, not someone with such incredible power. He remembers having analyzed her stats without finding anything abnormal, although the class section was marked as hidden. Thinking about this, Kim believes that Sepia might have latent potential at the level of Sigmund's power. Trying to cheer her up, the protagonist says they'll arrive at the city soon, making her respond with no reaction. At that moment, he realizes he will need to earn more trust before he can ask any questions about her power. He also recalls that it's best not to be impatient to avoid ending up like Victor. He contemplates how he might uncover more of Sepia's backstory, trying to learn more about this alter ego. However, Kim decides he should take the risk despite the low trust level and chooses to ask her about her power. He asks if she's a heretic, which completely shocks her, causing her trust to drop by 5 points. Meanwhile, at the Atera Cathedral, Clara is received by one of the followers who thanks her for coming from so far away. He asks Clara to follow him, making her observe the place with excitement. The attendant mentions that although she was taught proper manners, he still expects her to behave appropriately. With that, they arrive before someone seated on a throne, which makes Clara tense before kneeling and greeting the noble moon of Luna. The person on the throne was Saint Luna, who also thanks her for coming from so far away. Clara mentions feeling honored to meet the noble saint of the moon. But then Luna interrupts her, saying she already knows why she was summoned, as she had visited the Forgotten Temple. She asks Clara to recount everything she saw and experienced in that temple. With that, Clara begins telling her story alongside the protagonist until Luna cuts her off, saying it's enough after she explains about the night. Luna thanks her again, saying her abilities will be of great help to the church, and that her parish will grant her an appropriate reward. After Clara leaves the throne room, Luna calls for the archbishop named Paul, saying that Clara didn't lie in her story. However, she acknowledges that Monty, whom Clara had mentioned, was false, prompting Luna to ask for a letter to be sent to Libranos, as they needed to know where he was. Back to the protagonist, Clara grows angry at his question, stating that the kidnappers were clearly from a cult. Kim mentions that something cults have in common is that they seek power instead of faith, but the power she used was chaotic and wild, unlike anything he had seen before. Sepia realizes that she couldn't do much more, as his question had made her more and more suspicious. She imagines he might be an inquisitor of the Church of Luna because of his combat skills, leading her to decide to tell him everything. It turns out that Sepia frequently experienced blackouts when overwhelmed by mana, and this has happened since she was a child. Kim asks if she couldn't control it with willpower, and Sepia says she can, mentioning that this power releases either fire or light magic. With that, the protagonist recalls the vision he had when he made the contract with Sepia, wondering if she can use sacred magic. Sepia mentions that even though she might have these overloads, she's never hurt a human being. But Kim knows that she hurt Victor, wondering if she either didn't see him as human or simply didn't remember. He wonders why she's revealing so much, thinking he might have scared her too much. At that moment, Sepia asks if he's an inquisitor, and he responds that he's just a regular mercenary, as he said before. However, she remains doubtful since he's from the East, making him realize that she considers him an Easterner and wondering how she would know the hometown of this character. Kim asks what the problem is with him being an Easterner, and she replies that she's heard there are many foreigners in the Holy Office. Our protagonist replies that he hates those oppressive groups, saying he's not part of the Inquisition. He remembers that the Inquisitors, called the First Moon of Luna, though they held much power, could eliminate anyone they suspected of being in a cult. He explains that if he were an Inquisitor, he would have killed her the moment he suspected her, and Sepia agrees with what he said. Taking advantage of the situation, he suggests they come up with a story for when they arrive in Libranos, because he doesn't want to tell Sigmund that she became his subordinate. Kim remembers that they can't separate because of the oath and plans to use her curse as an excuse for Sepia to keep traveling with him. But she immediately points out that Sigmund wouldn't believe it, as he'd be too worried about her. He asks if it wouldn't be better to say that than to reveal the subordination contract. At that moment, Sepia asks Kim to promise to stop Sigmund if he tries to follow them. Since Sigmund grew up in the slums, and despite becoming vice captain of the Knights, she doesn't want him to throw it all away because of her. Although Kim thinks it would be good to have Sigmund's help, he accepts her request because of her sincerity. He tells her the city is just ahead until he hears a strange noise. Looking down from the cliff, they see a group of knights from Libranos. With that, Sepia runs excitedly toward the soldiers, while Kim tries to stop her from running so she doesn't hurt herself. Even so, she keeps running, with Kim trying to catch up, thinking it's normal for her to be so eager after being away for so long. Our protagonist hopes everything will go well, seeing the knights approaching. But when he notices the uncontrolled look in Sigmund's eyes, he becomes worried until he sees Sigmund charging toward him. At that moment, Kim draws his sword to defend himself, only to be thrown back by the impact. With that, the protagonist tries to explain what happened as he sees the furious Sigmund slowly approaching him. He attacks the protagonist again, who dodges his strikes. However, Kim struggles to hold his ground against Sigmund being thrown back once more. Kim looks around, noticing the knights were prepared to attack him while keeping Sepia away from him. He realizes that, although he's not getting help, he's lucky that Sigmund hasn't reached his full potential. Our protagonist evokes a shield, making Sigmund think he's planning to use an ability, until Kim dodges his attack again. After avoiding the attack, Kim lands a direct kick on Sigmund, pushing him back. Sigmund acknowledges the protagonist's skill, only to be surprised by another attack. But this time, it's Sepia trying to strike her brother with an irritated look. He doesn't understand his sister's attitude, while Kim notices Sigmund was so surprised because Scipia is his only blood relative. Scipia scolds him, asking if he would kill her too, which worries Kim as Sigmund becomes curious about what she meant. Unfortunately, Scipia realizes too late that she said too much, making Sigmund wonder what she meant by dying without him. Back in Libranos, in the knight's reception room, the two create an explanation for Sigmund. Their story is that Kim is a wandering doctor from the east who cured Scipia's curse with his oriental techniques. At the same time, he managed to deal with the black mages. Scipia notices that Kim lies quite naturally, while Kim tries to make her understand that he had to do it. Sigmund apologizes for offending him, wondering if all Eastern doctors are like him, as he doesn't seem like a doctor, given his considerable martial skills. Kim explains that having crossed the ocean to get there, he had to know how to protect himself. However, Kim adds that his sister's curse wasn't fully cured, only that its progress had been stopped as it couldn't be healed by ordinary methods. Her brother asks if there's a way to cure her permanently, and Kim seizes the opportunity, saying there is a way. Kim proclaims himself as the best doctor from the East, which makes Scipia even more suspicious of him. At that moment, he fabricates a similar event from his homeland, saying that conditions change all the time, forcing them to travel together to gather the necessary ingredients. When Kim explains that Scipia would have to go on a journey with him, Sigmund is shocked. He becomes enraged, saying that he couldn't allow it, and asks if he couldn't gather the ingredients in her place. But the protagonist explains that he's the only one capable of finding the ingredients, and the medicine needs to be administered as soon as possible to prevent the curse from worsening. Still, Sigmund can't accept the idea of Scipia going on a journey. At that moment, Scipia grabs his arm, saying she would return healthy, with a bright smile. Sigmund tries to change the subject, asking Scipia to go rest in his room while he speaks with the doctor. Scipia thanks him, saying she looks forward to sharing a meal with her brother after so long. As she walks past the protagonist, he grabs her hand, using the excuse of checking her pulse. Then he instructs her not to wander around the castle and to write a farewell letter to Sigmund. As she walks away, Kim tells her to take care, saying he'll check on her from time to time. At that moment, Sigmund demands he stop acting so fake, to which Kim responds that he was about to say the same thing. Sigmund begins by asking who he really is, making Kim realize that the same answer as before wouldn't be accepted. With that, Kim reveals that he goes by the name Dio while working as a mercenary. He admits that he doesn't have a mercenary medal, as he planned to obtain one in Libranos. The problem is, Sigmund asks how he can guarantee that he'll be able to lift her curse. Our protagonist knows that despite having already dealt with the curse, he can never reveal that Scipia became his subordinate as a consequence. Sigmund senses that he's hiding something and decides to ask why he saved Scipia. At that moment, Kim starts recalling her, realizing he doesn't have a solid answer, aside from improvising when she asked him earlier. But Kim decides to respond by asking if there needs to be a reason to help someone. This calms Sigmund down, though he still doesn't want Scipia to travel with Kim, finding him too suspicious. Kim acknowledges Sigmund's concern, knowing he can't fully explain the truth. Sigmund mentions that besides saving her, Kim somehow knew about the curse, which they hadn't revealed to anyone, and asks if he can truly cure her. The protagonist assures him that he's the only one capable of saving her, apart from the Archbishop of Luna, which irritates Sigmund, who says they aren't trustworthy. Kim already knew about Sigmund's distrust of the followers of Luna, forcing him to choose between trusting the protagonist or Luna's followers. Then Kim decides to push the situation in his favor, offering to help him with the recent disappearances. Sigmund becomes suspicious of his information, asking what the protagonist could possibly know that would help them. But when Kim mentions Dark Alley, Sigmund draws his sword and points it at him, clearly furious with the mention of that term. Kim smiles, staring at Sigmund, and asks him to relax. He mentions that he noticed Sigmund was wondering how the protagonist knew his name. With that, he explains that he learned about the disappearances because people were talking about how they were becoming more frequent and were tied to the dark side of Libranos. Our protagonist stands up, saying he was curious where Sigmund had started searching for his sister. He already knew that Sigmund had turned the alleys of Libranos into battlegrounds. Kim also points out that he knows the criminal groups in the alleys are so powerful that even the knight's corpse dares not touch them. Kim says that since Sigmund had stirred up trouble with dangerous people, it had become a problem for him, to which Sigmund responds that the people around him talk too much. Our protagonist explains that he's just trying to prove his worth, causing the vice captain to wonder how he plans to do that. Kim then says that he could help him take down the alley groups. After listening to the protagonist's plan for a while, Sigmund is impressed by how detailed it is, asking if this was really Kim's first time in Libranos. Kim comments that having been a military surgeon in his youth, he had done several jobs in Libranos, and he asks if Sigmund couldn't trust him with this task. Sigmund relents, asking what Kim wants in exchange for his help. After the meeting, Sigmund wonders how Kim obtained so much information about him, finding it hard to believe that he had simply deduced his connection to the underworld. The vice captain acknowledges that the criminal groups have been a problem for a long time and wonders if Kim can really solve it. He concludes it would be better to have someone monitor him. Meanwhile, Kim returns to the city, heading toward the alleys. He recognizes that everything is just like in the game, including the entrance that appears after passing through a certain busy shopping street. That entrance leads to the border with the criminal underworld. Our protagonist recalls that he chose this city as his starting point and therefore remembers the story that unfolded in the alleys. The alleys of Libranos are controlled by two main groups, the Golden Dawn of the moderate faction and the extremist Bloody Howl. As the story progresses in the game, Bloody Howl manages to dominate the alleys until they are wiped out by Sigmund, who is enraged by Sepia's death. However, since Sepia is alive, Sigmund wouldn't have a reason to become enraged, making the story a mystery to Kim. But Kim remembers that during the war between the two groups, Golden Dawn is destroyed by Bloody Howl due to the damage they suffered because of Sigmund. He realizes that he's at that point in the story, and when he enters Golden Dawn's base, the member Rudens is surprised to see the Inspector General delivering news. Kim mentions that they no longer intend to trouble the alleys while noting that even after all they've been through, Rudens still greets him with a smile. Though this is expected from the leader of Golden Dawn, Kim still remembers that this man is a criminal. After delivering his message, he bids farewell to the leader, who advises Kim to be careful on his way back. With that, Kim acknowledges that the first part of his plan is complete, leaving only the second part. This part involves the storage NPC as he approaches a girl with a chest window over her head. Next, the protagonist heads to a dungeon where he battles a group of knife-wielding rats. Kim pauses for a moment after killing the rats to analyze his skills, noting that the fire essence he recovered helped meet the requirements for his ability. One of the rats sneaks up on him while he's observing his skill window, attempting a surprise attack. But Kim is protected by a magic barrier and then strikes the rat with his sword, marking it before activating the mark and causing the remaining rats to explode. At that moment, a priest appears, calling out to Kim and asking if he's alright. This priest is Father Krupus, who recognizes Kim's strength as his magic was able to break the magic shield he used. Our protagonist remembers meeting Krupus after registering as a mercenary and noting that he's another member of the Temple of Luna. Kim's initial intention was to do this mission alone, but he figures there's nothing wrong with having a priest with him. Krupus thanks him for his help in investigating the church, while Kim says he's been able to handle the rats more quickly thanks to the priest's assistance. They acknowledge that they've investigated enough and it's fine to stop at that point in the sewers, believing there are no more rat men. Afterward, they part ways, with Krupus giving a slight malicious smile as he watches Kim walk away. That's because Krupus had received a message looking for a mercenary wielding a greatsword and using explosive magic, realizing he had found his target. Later that day, 3 bandits find Kim, believing he's the target they were sent to eliminate, thinking he's a spy from Golden Dawn. Kim notices how quickly information is spreading through the underworld, already suspecting that something like this might happen. The way the protagonist looks at them irritates one of the bandits, as it seems like he's underestimating their strength. They draw their swords, identifying themselves as members of Bloody Howl, and prepare to face him. Kim gives a slight smile, thinking it's perfect, as he's just a few experience points away from reaching level 90. He then says that although he wants to meet the leader of Bloody Howl, he could deal with the bandits if it would make their meeting easier. This comment enrages the 3 bandits even more, and they charge at him while Kim continues to look at them confidently. Not long after, the door to the group's hideout starts being hit hard. One of the bandits opens the door, falling to the ground in despair, calling for the boss and trying to talk about the protagonist. But at that moment, Kim arrives at the door with a malicious smile, saying they actually managed to bring him to the leader of Bloody Howl. Kim appears at the entrance holding one of the bandits, which irritates the leader of Bloody Howl, before he throws the bandit into the base. At that moment, the leader faces him with a smile, asking if the protagonist is the Easterner Sigmund encountered. She asks why the protagonist came to their base, knowing he had already chosen the side of Golden Dawn. Our protagonist replies that Sigmund asked him to clean up the alleys, standing in front of the door. The leader laughs, saying that Sigmund would never let an outsider handle a problem in Libranos, as he is too proud. With that, something explodes behind the protagonist, making the leader wonder if he was telling the truth as she stands up to ask if he was there to declare war. Kim calmly raises his hand, saying that wasn't his intention, which confuses the leader. After gaining her attention, Kim explains that he indeed came at Sigmund's request. But he clarifies that he's not a subordinate of the vice captain and that his desire is to unite the alleys. However, this comment enrages the leader, who orders her knights to finish off the protagonist, saying their conversation ends there. The bandits charge at Kim, while an archer tries to shoot him from a distance. Kim manages to block the arrow while analyzing the enemies approaching him. As the enemies close in, he assesses the distance and direction to prepare his defense. After that, Kim evokes his sword, making a quick motion that sends all of them flying. They don't understand how he could have such strength with a simple strike, while they are blown back by a strong wind. At that moment, they realize that Kim is a sword mage, telling each other to be careful with his blade. The bandits start wondering how they could face him, and Kim charges at them, landing a punch on one of the bandits. This blow sends him crashing into the other bandits behind him. Kim exudes confidence, emanating energy and saying they talk too much, asking how long the leader planned to just watch, calling her Tuska. He adds that if she didn't join the fight soon, he would take down all of her subordinates. At that moment, Tuska becomes enraged, ordering them to get out of the way, as she would deal with the intruder herself. Tuska draws her axe and shield, charging at the protagonist, who defends himself with his sword. Noticing that she managed to push him back, the leader says he acts with too much confidence, even though he doesn't have many skills. Our protagonist realizes that although Tuska doesn't have as many skills as Sigmund, she's still stronger than him. After pushing her axe away, Kim opens his guard, making Tuska believe she can finish the fight at that moment. She strikes at him again, forcing Kim to defend with his arm, which confuses her. Tuska wonders how he managed to do that, while Kim starts glowing with his strong energy, saying that arm is equipped with level 100 gear. The leader doesn't understand what happened, watching his arm being protected by a shining artifact. At that moment, Kim remembers that this type of gear is called an artifact. Because no player cared about technical details, an item of unique or higher classification was simply treated as an artifact. Tuska becomes furious, asking if he really thinks he can defeat her just because of that artifact. When she tries to use her shield to strike him, Kim lands a direct punch that blocks her attack. Kim looks at her confidently, saying that he would be able to defeat her with that artifact, which makes her slightly concerned. After that, he lands a punch on Tuska's side, causing her to spit blood before collapsing to the ground. Still unwilling to give up, she spreads her arms in fury. Our protagonist notices that her recovery rate is quite high. Tuska closes her arms and charges at Kim, pushing him back with the force of her explosion of rage. He realizes that even with artifacts, dealing with her is becoming dangerous, forcing him to dodge her attacks. As Kim dodges one of Tuska's strikes, he grabs her arm, causing her to drop her axe. Taking advantage of the moment, he knocks her to the ground and then delivers a blow to her neck, knocking her unconscious. After dealing with Tuska, he tells her to stay there and rest. The bandits are shocked that Tuska was defeated, while Kim pulls out a dagger to threaten her. He warns the group to behave if they care about her life, finally making them give up the fight. Our protagonist is pleased that the battle is over, thinking he's gotten stronger. However, he realizes there is still much to do to truly become powerful. At that moment, he begins to reflect on the past, saying he misses Raymond. Raymond was the first friend he made since getting trapped in the game. Kim imagines that despite everything, Raymond must be fine wherever he is. However, somewhere far away, Raymond is being tortured, surrounded by corpses, while he begs for help. A woman named Scarlet approaches him as her subordinates watch. She asks if they found anything, and her subordinate mentions that after a little persuasion, they revealed everything. The subordinate explains that their target left in a carriage after the monster wave in Avera, and the coachman said the person asked to be dropped off in the plains. Scarlet notes that these men claimed to be loyal when they first brought them in. However, she taunts Raymond, asking if that's all their loyalty amounts to, blowing smoke from her cigarette into his battered face. She remarks that believing in loyalty only leads to suffering, while observing the nearly lifeless body of another mercenary. At that moment, another subordinate arrives to deliver a letter from Atera. The letter mentions that a suspicious mercenary was spotted in Libranos with a low level and explosive abilities similar to the monster hunter Monty. Scarlet believes this could give her a lead on Monty, or even better, that this mercenary could be Monty himself, which excites her. Having settled the matter, Scarlet orders Raymond to be killed, who desperately screams that she promised to let him live if he told the truth. Back at the Bloody Howl base, Tuska has already recovered and wonders why Kim spared her when he had the perfect chance to kill her. But Kim mentions that he came only to talk, not to wipe out Bloody Howl. She realizes it would be better to accept his request and asks what he wants. Kim explains that Sigmund's request is to unite the two underworld factions. However, he admits that he doesn't like dealing with such a troublesome task, as if he were to unite them, he would be stuck managing both groups. In that case, he suggests that she try unifying the groups herself, which leaves Tuska confused. The protagonist says that although he approached Golden Dawn with the same idea, they wouldn't help, because even though they seem kind, they'd betray them at the first opportunity. But he likes Tuska more, saying he could tell Sigmund that the two factions were united while she would control everything. That way, she would have the entire underworld under her command. One of the Bloody Howl bandits watches the conversation, remembering 10 years ago when he joined the group. Back then, the criminals just lived scattered throughout the alleys until they started to unite under the current leader of Bloody Howl. Tuska's leadership skills and charisma helped her gain followers. Seeing that she could become a great leader who would rule the alleys and overthrow the power of Libranos, he swore loyalty to her. With that, Kim's suggestion that she could become the ruler of the alleys excites Tuska. Kim watches her happily, wondering how she could fall for these tricks, even though she didn't know him well. He explains that his plan is to place bombs in specific locations around the city. The idea is to weaken Golden Dawn's forces so they can finish them off, and Tuska asks if the Knights wouldn't stop them from fighting so openly. But Kim mentions that the Knights might end up helping them, as the official story would be that Bloody Howl saved the city by stopping Golden Dawn. Tuska was thrilled by the idea of becoming the ruler of the alleys. However, one of the bandits realized that Sigmund would never go along with such a plan, suspecting something was off with the Knights turning a blind eye to it. He panicked, realizing it was likely a trap, and told Tuska that the plan was foolish, asking if she really believed Kim's words. Tuska ordered him to be quiet, insisting that since the protagonist had the chance to kill them and didn't, the plan must be legitimate. She then commanded the bandits to take the explosives. This frustrated the bandit, seeing that Tuska was placing full trust in Kim and feeling the need to do something to help her. A few hours later, back at the castle, Scipia meets with Kim again. He asks how she's feeling, and Scipia admits that her heart hurts whenever he's too far away, describing the sensation as suffocating. Kim tries to downplay the danger of it, realizing that he needs to be more careful about how far he strays to avoid worrying her. He then mentions that he's almost finished with his missions in Libranos and asks her to pack her things so they can leave soon. However, Scipia accepts with a rather dejected tone, and Kim recognizes that she's depressed about being forced to leave her city and family. He wonders how he can comfort her. To help her feel better, Kim tells her that they'll try to find a way to break the oath during their journey. He also takes her to see the starry sky of Libranos from a new perspective before they depart. As they arrive among the trees, Kim admits to himself that he's not very good at comforting people. At that moment, he knows he needs to have a conversation with Sigmund, as he's been following Kim to discuss their plan. Sigmund, irritated by Kim's casual attitude, warns that he wouldn't hesitate to cut off his head if he did anything improper. He also informs Kim that he had been under Sigmund's surveillance the entire week while completing his part of the plan. Sigmund then admits that he's impressed by Kim, who stirred up both criminal groups before enlisting as a mercenary to go into the sewers. He asks if Kim was in need of money since he had ventured into the sewers, while Kim acknowledges that he was expecting to be followed. With that, Sigmund comments that it was very dangerous to enter Bloody Howl's base as they don't hesitate to commit heinous acts. At that moment, Sigmund asks what would have happened to Scipia if Kim had died, making Kim understand that Sigmund's primary concern is his sister's safety. Our protagonist tells him that all he needs to do is move the knights according to their plan. Sigmund seeks confirmation, asking if the plan is to arrest Bloody Howl, while they think they'll be receiving help from the knights. Kim confirms, adding that they still need to give Bloody Howl enough time to deal with Golden Dawn before taking action. They'll have to wait for the signal. When Sigmund asks what the signal will be, Kim explains that it will be explosions. The vice captain then questions if Kim plans to put civilians in danger to carry out the plan, and Kim assures him there will be no casualties. 4 days pass, and the day of the battle in Libranos finally arrives. The city had been calm and peaceful during those days, while preparations for the battle were carried out behind the scenes. Tuska reports that they've placed the explosives in the city square, and all they have to do is wait for the bombs to go off at noon. She's excited, confident that she has a benefactor by her side, and that her dream of uniting the allies is about to come true. The whole time, she had been certain that she could have defeated Golden Dawn long ago if not for the potential interference of Sigmund, until Kim entered the picture. With that, she watches the clock, growing impatient as she waits for the time to start the plan. At that moment, Tuska's instincts flare up, alerting her to an imminent danger she cannot ignore. She approaches a nearby box and, upon opening it, discovers a detonator inside. As she wonders why that bomb is there, she notices a note from Kim saying they were checking the power of the explosion. Suddenly, the bombs go off at the same time as fireworks explode across the city, dazzling the civilians who watch the spectacle. None of them understand what's happening, assuming it must be something the Lord arranged to entertain them, as there was no festival. Scipia watches from her window, enchanted by the fireworks show. Meanwhile, Kim is resting, reflecting on how careless and overexcited Bloody Howl had been by setting up so many bombs. The reality is that Kim's plan was to spend the night swapping the bombs for fireworks, which left him utterly exhausted. Even so, he's pleased with the final result, watching the fireworks light up the sky. In the midst of the fireworks, the knights notice a fire caused by Tuska's explosives, prompting them to rush out to combat the flames. At the same time, Kim is resting, receiving the experience points from defeating Tuska. He believes that not even she could have survived that explosion, while the remaining members of Bloody Howl continue fighting against Golden Dawn. At this moment, one of Tuska's subordinates encounters Rudens, who is furious at Bloody Howl for exploiting their weakness. With the ongoing battle, Kim receives a notification that he has completed the mission of clearing out the alleys of Libranos, earning the title of Honorary Knight of Libranos. While watching the fight, Kim assumes Rudens is not much of a threat either, expecting the knights to arrive and end the battle. Just then, Sigmund arrives with the knights, which excites Kim as he thinks about going to check on Scipia. Back with Scipia, she gazes out the window, thinking that the fireworks were a gift Kim had planned for her, and begins preparing to leave. She knows they might change their minds if she's still there when they return. Suddenly, the door opens, startling Scipia, and she asks who's there. She approaches the door, remembering that she had locked it. Worried, Scipia doesn't notice someone standing behind her at that moment. Meanwhile, Sigmund receives reports from the knights that they are clearing the sectors of the criminal groups. The vice captain admits that Kim's plan actually worked despite his dislike for him. He recalls that Tuska died in the Bloody Howl explosion and Golden Dawn was wiped out in the surprise attack, leaving the remaining members to be taken down by the knights. Reflecting on this, he wonders if it was really the best decision to let Scipia be under Kim's care while ordering his knights to retrieve Rudens' body. However, Rudens' body begins to emit a dark mist, which shocks Sigmund. He recognizes the mist as something reminiscent of the demon race, increasing his concern. The mist starts moving toward the base where Scipia is, prompting Sigmund to command everyone to rush back to protect her. Back to Kim, he starts getting worried, thinking everything was going smoothly until he realizes Rudens has taken Scipia hostage at the knight's base. Rudens requests a conversation while Kim recalls his experiences from the game, remembering that Rudens never survived in any of his playthroughs. The story only mentioned that Rudens developed Golden Dawn through business rather than combat and disappeared after Sigmund's awakening. This leads Kim to realize there might be a hidden story about Rudens he wasn't aware of. He also notices that Rudens' aura has changed completely since their last encounter. Thinking it might be an act, Kim asks if Rudens has something to discuss with him. Rudens confirms by snapping his fingers, activating magic that seals the door with his mana, making Kim suspect he's a mage. This worries Kim as he wonders how powerful Rudens could be and whether he could defeat him, especially with Scipia being held hostage. Not holding back, Kim throws a dagger at Rudens, hitting him in the head, and immediately follows up by stabbing him in the chest with his sword. Though the attack knocks Rudens down, Kim knows that this won't be enough to kill him. Taking the opportunity, he rescues Scipia and moves away from Rudens to keep her safe. Rudens rises, praising Kim for being smart enough to retreat, and comments that despite his young age, Kim is a skilled swordsman. His wounds begin to heal as he asks if Kim has figured out his secret. Our protagonist realizes that Rudens is a vampire, a race with a unique healing ability. However, Rudens remarks that Kim isn't as skilled as he expected, suggesting that the problem might lie with his equipment or abilities. Kim acknowledges that the issue is both as he tries to compensate for his lack of skill with his equipment while using a low-level weapon. He takes the chance to provoke Rudens, asking if he's going to give him new gear. Kim also mentions that he's irritated by Rudens judging him, especially since Rudens was the one who invaded the place and kidnapped Scipia. Rudens, now eager, prepares to retaliate against Kim with a direct attack. Our protagonist manages to use his sword to block the blow, but he's thrown back while Rudens' hand is revealed to be completely destroyed from the impact. The vampire grabs Kim's sword, noticing that Kim is holding his ground in the fight. However, Rudens warns that it's still not enough to stop him. Kim breaks free from Rudens, deliberately leaving his guard open, prompting the vampire to lunge forward, exploiting the perceived weakness in his defense. At that moment, Kim strikes Rudens in the eye with a silver candle holder. Even after being struck with the silver candle holder, Rudens remains calm as he pulls it from his eye. Our protagonist asks if the blow was too shallow since he intended to blow Rudens' head off. Rudens, now aware that Kim had left an opening on purpose to force him to advance, acknowledges it was a clever tactic to face an opponent faster than him. Kim assumes a fighting stance, realizing Rudens must be a high-level vampire to withstand being hit by silver. Rudens starts laughing, saying that Kim passed his test, leaving Kim completely confused and asking if they had met before. The vampire explains that he knows who the protagonist is, referring to him as the Forgotten Swordsman. He asks why Kim seems surprised, as just as Kim knew Rudens' identity, Rudens also knew Kim's. Taking advantage of the situation, Kim asks who Rudens truly is, and Rudens reveals that he is a vampire lord, the leader of a clan that has lived for thousands of years. Kim realizes that Rudens must be at least level 350 to hold the rank of Vampire Lord. He admits that if the fight had been serious, he wouldn't have survived and asks if Rudens' clan resides in Libranos. Rudens mentions that he is the only vampire in the city, reassuring Kim. At that moment, Rudens begins to explain that their story is tied to lost tales from long ago, stories he encountered when he saw murals in a temple and gained powers. When Rudens asks if Kim remembers this, a class mission notification appears, revealing that Kim could unlock hidden powers if he uncovers more. Our protagonist asks Rudens to explain more about the story of this power. Rudens begins by recounting events from thousands of years ago during a period known as the Sacred Era. He explains that while today people worship only Luna, the moon goddess, in the past, there were many deities who shared their teachings with humanity. At that time, there was a deity far more powerful than Luna, the sun god. Rudens shows his mark as a follower of the sun god, reminding Kim of the golden nights he saw in his dreams. Kim also recalls hearing about many churches in the past, until only Luna's church survived. Confused, Kim wonders how the sun god, despite being more powerful, was defeated and his church destroyed, asking for the name of this god. Rudens responds that he cannot speak the god's name lightly, as the world is under Luna's authority. If anyone discovered that Rudens was trying to help the sun god, the consequences could be severe. Rudens advises Kim to be cautious as he too possesses the sun god's power. Kim is shocked to learn that he has the power of a god he just heard about. He asks Rudens for further clarification, but Rudens questions whether he really needs everything explained to him. The vampire asks if Kim didn't see the story in the murals, explaining that during the Sacred War, the Demon King invaded the human world, forcing both gods to unite. However, Luna coveted the sun god's power, which led her to erase the sun from history. Kim realizes that Luna's followers betrayed the sun god's church. Rudens continues, explaining that Luna wiped out all traces of the sun god's church to erase any record of him, turning him into a forgotten deity. Kim asks how Rudens survived all this time, and Rudens reveals that he is not the only survivor who has been hiding from Luna. But even so, Luna's followers allied with the Demon King to curse all the remaining Sun followers. This curse turned all the survivors into monsters, unable to live or die. At that moment, Kim recalls the night Adelia, realizing that she too must have been a follower of the Sun God, and understands that's how he inherited the Sun's power. Rudens notices Kim's realization and says that Scipia also wields the Sun God's power. Kim remembers her abilities and now understands that her power comes from the sun, not just from any ordinary magic as he had initially thought. Rudens further explains that Scipia was the reason he came to Libranos in the first place until she was kidnapped, thinking it was all part of the Sun God's plan for them all to meet. Our protagonist starts to realize that all the coincidences and encounters he has had were orchestrated by the Sun God. Meanwhile, a woman senses that the city is much noisier than usual, with her assistant remarking that it's the first time he's seen Libranos like this. This woman is Scarlet, who orders her assistant to investigate the area thoroughly, noting this information in her report. She asks if he knows where the knight they were looking for was, and the assistant mentions that he was last seen with Vice Captain Sigmund. Scarlet wonders how they know each other, while the assistant remembers that the Night Court has one of the best security forces they can find. But then she understands that he was implying the Night Court has more influence than Luna's local church. With this, Scarlet becomes interested in Sigmund, as her assistant mentions that the Vice Captain has a reputation for valuing honor as a loyal knight. That remark excites her, imagining the possibility of breaking Sigmund's faith and having a new toy for herself. She decides to check out Vice Captain Sigmund, who is heading to help Scipia. Our protagonist says he never imagined getting trapped in the game because of the Sun God. But Rudens notices someone arriving and gets quite excited, saying they would have to end their conversation at that moment. He mentions that Sigmund is approaching as they hear voices in the corridors ordering them to search for Scipia. Rudens says that although there are many questions left, he will get answers in time. However, for now, he must head to the Stellan to meet his friend there. With that, the vampire begins using his energy to flee, saying it was nice meeting the protagonist and hoping he faithfully follows the revelations he has received. After saying that the sun will rise again, Rudens disappears from the room. The door is finally unlocked, allowing Sigmund to break it down, searching for the intruder and finding Kim with an unconscious Scipia. He wonders what had happened in the completely destroyed room, while Kim analyzes the information from the mission he completed with Rudens. Some time passes and Kim ends up imprisoned, complaining about not receiving food, and the knight scolds him. Kim realizes the situation has gotten much more complicated, imagining it will be difficult to avoid suspicion about his involvement with demons. At that moment, Sigmund approaches the cell, prompting Kim to ask to be released. The knight gets angry with Kim again until Sigmund asks to leave him alone as he intends to interrogate him. After the knight leaves, Kim asks if he isn't going too far, especially considering everything he has done for the city. But Sigmund apologizes for that, explaining that he had to act that way to avoid drawing attention from the other knights present. At this point, he says there is a more serious problem, and Kim says he has already explained his innocence if it's something related to the demons. Sigmund explains that they received a follower of Luna who was asking about a mercenary named Monty, as well as showing curiosity about the explosions. Kim understands that he is now the target of Luna's church, being protected by Sigmund, who ignored their order to allow the interrogation of Kim and Scipia. Our protagonist asks if this isn't dangerous, as he remembers that Luna's church's power extends across the entire continent. This is because he knows that even with all the members of the Night Corps on Sigmund's side, they would still be powerless against the church. The vice captain explains that he was concerned they would discover Scipia's powers if she were interrogated. Despite not fully trusting the protagonist yet, Sigmund realizes he has no other option and opens the cell. Kim becomes worried, asking what he's going to do, and Sigmund says he's going to try to stop them, as there's no time to lose. At that moment, the knights rush out, calling for Sigmund to inform him of Luna's church's actions. Noticing that their plan is already underway, Sigmund decides to leave, abandoning Kim. He tells the protagonist that Scipia is in his room, ordering him to take her and leave Libranos immediately. Even recognizing Sigmund's frustration, Kim accepts the request and rushes to find her. Kim wonders if, despite Sigmund doing everything possible to stop the Inquisitors from approaching Scipia, he will manage to do so. At the same time, he recalls that during his time in the game, he believed Luna's church was an ally of the players, but now realizes they are his enemies. Our protagonist begins to shiver just thinking about this situation. Meanwhile, Luna's knights shout that their investigation gives them authority over Libranos. However, the knights argue that the city is under their jurisdiction, and they will not tolerate any act of disrespect. At that moment, Scarlet appears with a malicious smile, overhearing their words. She asks if they would dare stand in the way of the agents of holiness and still talk about forgiveness. Although the knight tries to explain that interrogations without the Lord's permission are forbidden, Scarlet ignores him, delivering a blow that slices his throat. This act angers the knights, who draw their swords to confront her. Scarlet says she is using her authority as an inquisitor to punish the knight, adding that everything could be resolved if they handed over Scipia and Kim. But if they refused, she would execute all of them. The knights grew worried until Sigmund arrived to stop the fight, saying they should not act without his command. He ordered them to remove the body of the knight killed by Scarlet, as he approached her. At that moment, she started to appear embarrassed, asking if Sigmund was the current leader of the night course. Sigmund explained that the Lord was absent, so he had taken command during this period. He then asked how she could have killed a knight, being an inquisitor trained to make fair judgments. But Scarlet simply explained that he sealed his fate when he got in her way, causing all the knights to revolt against her attitude. The vice captain ordered his knights to remain silent, saying that the inquisitors could start their investigation after the knights completed theirs. Scarlet understood that Sigmund wanted to hide something from them, believing it might be his younger sister, which made Sigmund angry with her. He said his younger sister was an unrelated victim and was currently recovering before being interrogated by the knights. At that moment, Scarlet sighed while Sigmund thought it was enough to convince her. However, she dragged the tip of her blade along the floor, moving it towards Sigmund's neck. He dodged, receiving a light cut on his face, with Scarlet asking what would happen if she didn't want to wait for Scipia to recover. The knights prepared to confront Scarlet, who acknowledged Sigmund's skills for dodging the strike. Since he had easily evaded her blow, she understood that Sigmund would be capable of countering her attack, even though he hadn't managed to draw his sword. Scarlet placed her hand on her face, blushing, saying she had heard that Sigmund had earned a title despite being a knight of humble origins. He responded that it was nothing compared to the title of Red Rose of the Goddess that Scarlet had received. With that, she praised Sigmund, calling him gallant before charging at him. Sigmund shielded himself with his arms as Scarlet remarked that he still refused to show his abilities. At that moment, a whip appeared, wrapping around his arm, pulled by Scarlet, believing that Sigmund was underestimating her skills. She struck him with a knee to the face, forcing him to kneel before her with his arm trapped by the whip. Scarlet asked why he didn't resist, suggesting that if his intention was to buy time, he shouldn't make any weak excuses. But he mentioned that he was merely being cautious as he hadn't expected the Knights of Luna to resort to such extreme measures. This was because despite traces of demons appearing in Libernus since the previous day, Scarlet had been there for even longer. Sigmund pointed out that she had mentioned the church wanting the identity of his sister and the mercenary. He then asked if mercenary Monty shouldn't be her priority. With this, Scarlet tried to use it to her advantage, saying she believed Monty was among the witnesses of the incident, leaving the appearance of demons for later. She explained that Sigmund's actions weren't much different from him trying to protect mercenary Monty, but Sigmund explained that he didn't know any mercenary named Monty, and that not even the detained mercenary matched the information they had on Monty. Scarlet imagined that, although he wasn't lying, she couldn't understand why he was risking so much, assuming it was either due to his pride or for his family's safety. Regardless of the reason, she believed it would be fun to break Sigmund. However, at that moment, the knights called her to inform her that the detained mercenary had disappeared. We then go back a few moments while Kim was escaping, furious with Sigmund for just opening the door. This didn't help much given how complex the path was, resembling more of a labyrinth which he could only navigate well because he had been there before. With that, he remembered that moving the bed in the third room to the left would reveal a secret passage. This way, he managed to escape the prison and reach the back of the night course base. At that moment, he began hearing the clash between the Knights of Libernus and those from Luna's church. Kim remembered that Sigmund had told him Scipia was on the 4th floor. Although he wanted to destroy everything, he recalled that Sigmund was the only one who knew about his escape, believing it was better to avoid contact with any other knight. At the same time, he couldn't simply ignore Scipia, making the situation very difficult for him to resolve. He started searching through his inventory, thinking he should have grabbed all the items from Libernus' storage. After seeing so many items, he finally found something that could be really useful. The item was a transformation potion that would allow him to take on the form of the designated target for 10 minutes. At that moment, one of the maids finds the servant named Ted, asking if he had found Sigmund. Ted says he had gone to meet Scipia at Sigmund's request, while Kim, disguised as this servant, ends up learning his name. Since he had only knocked the servant out on the way, he felt a little bad for what he had done. He uses the excuse that he had gotten Scipia's medicine from Sigmund, and the maid tells him which room she was in. At that moment, Ken realizes it was a good idea to have chosen the transformation potion instead of the invisibility potion to avoid having to open all the doors. After knocking on the door, he says he is Ted, bringing a message from Sigmund. When she tries to open the door slightly to ask what happened, Ted grabs her arm, saying they don't have much time, which frightens her. Scipia stares at him, while Kim returns to his normal form, and she recognizes him, wondering how he managed to get there. At that moment, they hear the Inquisitor's shouts, forcing the knights to clear the way, making Scipia anxious about the threat of being labeled heretics. Kim says he can explain on the way, asking if she trusts him, extending his hand to her. She takes the protagonist's hand, but then he throws a potion at her, leaving Scipia in shock. It turns out it was a petrification potion that would keep her in that state for 10 minutes. With that, he opens his inventory to store the petrified Scipia, remembering that in the game, nothing alive could be placed in the inventory. But any petrified item was considered a stone statue, recalling that he had done this before when he petrified a monster before releasing it in a village. Our protagonist discovered this secret while testing the limits of the storage character's abilities. After that, he jumps out the window, hearing the knights enraged because he had disappeared, knowing that this would agitate both groups of knights. Kim decides to leave that for Sigmund to handle while he escapes with Sepia and heads for the city of the dead called Astellum. He remembers that Sepia and Sigmund grew up in the slums fighting to survive. The two were forced to endure the cruelties of many people, such as criminals ignored by the knights. Those alleys, notorious for their poor security, were the place where Sepia learned that humans did not give kindness without a good reason. After being deceived by a man pretending to be a knight, they were almost sold as slaves. Another time, they were nearly used to transport drugs after being tricked by a noble with a gentle appearance. Because of this, she learned to distrust everyone around her, except for Sigmund. This remained true until she met Kim, who managed to shake her resolve not to trust anyone. She begins to wonder if the truth she learned that good deeds don't come without a reason might be wrong. When she wakes up, Kim is staring at her as she lies on the ground asking if she's okay, noting that it had only been a short time since she was free from the petrification. But then she feels that in addition to being far from her brother, she's also causing trouble for Kim, believing she can't continue just receiving help. Kim asks if she's okay, wondering if it might be a side effect of the petrification. Sepia tells the protagonist that she wants to become stronger so she won't need to be protected by anyone anymore. She asks if that's possible if she stays by his side. Our protagonist looks at her, surprised, before smiling and saying that it's possible, though she would face a different kind of suffering than any she's experienced before. With that, she gets excited, saying she won't cry or give up. This makes him happy, thinking he'll feel much more relieved when she becomes stronger, since he wouldn't be able to stop her despite having promised Sigmund to protect her. To continue, he takes the opportunity to explain their current situation. When Sepia understands their predicament, she grows concerned, thinking that Kim could have left her behind and thanks him for keeping his promise to Sigmund. She says she didn't get a chance to say goodbye to her brother, while Kim assures her they'll meet again, though he himself isn't sure of that. After that, Kim starts rummaging through his belongings, looking for a weapon to help Sepia defend herself. He finds a bow called the Crystal Recurve Bow, which has no level restrictions. Sepia becomes curious about the bow, and Kim explains that it's a weapon that can be used even with low physical stats. Our protagonist acknowledges that he was planning a way to help Sepia train, believing that the bow is the best weapon to improve both her physical strength and agility. Although he had heard from Rudin that she belongs to the mage class, Kim still believes that Sepia needs to improve her accuracy to use her spells effectively. As Kim watches Sepia, he contemplates the possibilities for her growth, wondering if he should focus on improving her basic skills. At that moment, two orcs are walking when one of them is hit by an arrow from a hidden location. The surviving orc becomes cautious, searching for his enemy as his partner falls into the lake. At the same time, the archer prepares another arrow to hit her next target from atop a tree, striking the head of the fallen orc. After witnessing another attack on his partner, the orc grows curious, while the archer decides to drop down onto the back of her target. She delivers a knee to the orc's head, trying to knock him down. However, the orc manages to stay on his feet and swings his axe in an attempt to strike his enemy. The archer dodges the orc's attack, already using her magic to set the tip of her arrow ablaze. She shoots the arrow into the orc's eye, leaving him vulnerable. At that moment, the archer jumps onto the orc's back, using her bow to strangle him. After applying some pressure to his neck, she manages to bring him down to the ground. With that, she defeats both orcs and turns to her ally, saying she had already told him she could handle the two by herself. That ally is Kim, who acknowledges that Archer Sepia performed exceptionally well in action, wondering what had happened in the meantime. It turns out Sepia's rate of growth had been great, as she already knew self-defense. He also realizes it was foolish to think she would have trouble seeing blood, noticing how quickly she learned things, which excites him about teaching her more and more. It had only been half a month, and Sepia had grown significantly since they left Libranos. Sepia says she will check if there are any more orcs remaining, and Kim simply agrees with her idea. Our protagonist is impressed by her evolution, as Sepia had only developed her physical skills. He also recalls that she hasn't used her sun power again, which could make her much more powerful. The problem with that power is that she can only use it when in danger, activating it as a form of self-defense. As a side effect, she always faints afterward. At that point, Kim opens Sepia's status window and notices that she had gone from level 15 to 30, though her class remains unknown. He wonders how he could remove the question marks, believing it might be through a special mission. But at that moment, he trips over some items left by the orcs and decides to take a look at what they were carrying. Kim recalls that solitary orcs don't cultivate anything, so the pickaxe he tripped over indicates that they lived in groups. With that, he suspects that there might be an orc cave nearby. Sepia notices that he is concerned about something while Kim continues examining the orcs' items. He tells Sepia that they will need to stop at a place on their way to Astellum. Their goal would be to find a witch, which leaves Sepia confused. It turns out that in this game world, witches are ambiguous beings, somewhere between monsters and NPCs, treated as cultists who give players missions. Amidst this, Kim's objective is to find the Shadow Witch, who lives in an orc cave around level 150. But the problem is that this witch is the apprentice of the Balanced Witch, who is considered the strongest witch in the world. Our protagonist believes that this witch might have information about Sepia's powers, As they begin walking, Sepia asks if his goal is to have the witch check her status, and he confirms it. Sepia asks if they can trust a witch, and Kim explains that, despite their bad reputation, witches still possess a lot of knowledge. Moreover, since witches are weak to fire, they wouldn't need to worry if they have to fight. Kim also mentions that he has a plan to avoid any confrontation with the witch, trying to reassure Sepia as they arrive at Hafter Canyon. In the middle of this canyon, they find a cave where a witch was resting in her laboratory. At that moment, a crow appears to wake her, and she pushes her pet away, complaining. After waking up, she adjusts her hat, wondering what was going on. The crow's eyes glow as it informs her about the approaching intruders. This excites the witch, saying they were arriving just in time for the harvest, calling her team potatoes. At that moment, some orcs approach her, asking if they were summoned. The witch informs them about the intruders, ordering them to get rid of them and take everything they have. As soon as the orcs leave, she settles down on her couch, hoping they at least have a lot of money. She starts thinking about how long it's been since she last ate anything, imagining that once she has money, she could buy a chicken to eat 1 egg a day. As the crows watch the two, Sepia finds the cave where the witch was hiding, informing Kim that she didn't see any orcs around. But Kim observes the sky filled with crows, suspecting that the witch already knows they are nearby. At that moment, the orcs appear, and Kim warns Sepia that they need to deal with them before they can meet the witch. Sepia gets excited, saying she can easily handle a few orcs as she pulls out her bow ready for battle. However, Kim stops her, telling her to wait, which confuses Sepia, as she asks if they aren't going to fight. He explains that they need to read the map first, as this could greatly increase their chances of winning. Our protagonist recognizes that he needs to be at level 90 to pass through the canyon, realizing he must use a different tactic since he's teaming up with Sepia. When Kim finds a guard post, he tells Sepia to go there and take care of the defense. His plan is for Sepia to face up to 3 orcs at a time, and if she feels like she's about to be surrounded, she should flee. Sepia feels a bit disappointed, saying that while she doesn't want to run, she'll be careful. This makes Kim happy because he knows that arrogance can be dangerous in tough situations and is relieved to see that she's not letting overconfidence get to her head. Kim explains that while she takes care of the guard post, he will handle the rest. She prepares for the fight, and when the orc at the guard post gets distracted, Kim gives the signal and Sepia fires an arrow to kill the first orc. The two charge at their enemies, who realize they are being attacked and advance against the invaders. When an orc tries to hit Sepia, Kim defends her with a sword strike. Sepia uses her arrows to take out the other orcs and finishes off the remaining enemies. Kim hands her a water flask, praising her for the excellent work. He watches Sepia, thinking she's gotten much stronger, as she didn't get hurt in the fight. When he opens Sepia's status window, he notices she's reached level 49, already realizing that he'll need to find gear for her when she reaches level 50. He feels a bit discouraged, thinking he could choose better equipment for Sepia if only he knew her class. Although her bow is strong, she still can't kill an orc with a single arrow. Sepia looks at Kim, saying she's wondering where the witch is, reminding him of their mission. She then questions if the witch would still be interested in talking to them after they killed her group of orcs. Our protagonist already suspects that she likely won't want to talk to them, which leads Sepia to wonder if they won't be able to speak with her at all. Kim smiles at her and says he has a plan. When they enter the cave, Kim reminds her that they won't need to fight, while Sepia thinks it's better to be prepared for anything. At that moment, Kim stares at her, wondering who raised her to be so tough. As they go deeper into the cave, Sepia is surprised not to find more orcs, wondering if the ones at the entrance were all of them. But Kim warns her that there's still one more orc, the orc shaman, whom they won't kill because he's the experiment the Shadow Witch is focused on. He understands that although they kill the worker orcs, they'll still be able to speak with the witch as long as they don't kill her orc shaman. Sepia wonders how they'll manage that, and Kim mentions that the plan is to go straight to the witch's lab without encountering the shaman. After following the cave a bit further, they find a shortcut that leads directly to the witch's laboratory. Our protagonist recalls that when this shortcut was discovered, there was a lot of debate among players about whether it was a bug or intentional. Sepia is impressed by how much Kim knows, asking when he had been through this cave before. Trying to avoid the question, Kim simply takes the shortcut, telling her to follow him. As they pass through the shortcut, Kim walks over a grate on the ground filled with discarded books. With that, they arrive at the witch's laboratory, where she sits resting in a chair. Kim tries to call out to the witch, who starts laughing before turning to them with a psychotic look. At that moment, the protagonist realizes they are in the right place, while Sepia grows worried about whether this is really the witch they're supposed to talk to. When the witch sees the two, she becomes more disheartened, thinking that she'll need to persevere for another half a year to get her orcs back. Our protagonist approaches her, commenting that she still seems to be having trouble with food, which impresses Sepia with the way he says it. The witch stands up, irritated, asking if they have any idea how much it costs to fund research for each orc. With that, she loses her temper, emitting a tremendous amount of energy. Sepia readies her arrow to defend against the witch, but Kim steps in front of his partner, stopping her from attacking. He pulls out a pouch which piques the witch's curiosity and introduces himself as an oriental doctor who came from across the sea. As he lets the pouch open, spilling the gold coins inside, Kim mentions that he heard about a witch conducting research and came to ask for her help. Scipia realizes that his plan is to try to bribe the witch, feeling quite disheartened. The witch angrily points out that he's asking for help after killing her orcs, prompting Kim to apologize, saying he didn't know they were her subordinates. However, he adds that he intends to offer something in return, saying he prepared something she might like. At that moment, the witch scoffs, asking if he thinks he can win her favor with a sack of gold. In response, Kim pulls out another pouch of gold, admitting he was reckless earlier, and asks if this would be enough. Upon seeing the amount of gold, the witch wonders how much there is, imagining that with all that money, she wouldn't need to buy chickens anymore. But then she recalls her master's words, saying that even if she's starving, she must not forget her dignity. The witch declares that they won't be able to buy her with that. However, Kim replies that the gold is merely compensation for the orcs they killed. The real gift, he says, is something else, and with that, he reveals a sphere of flaming energy. The witch recognizes it as a fire essence, completely shocked. Our protagonist recalls that the fire essence is such a rare item that both players and NPCs greatly desire to acquire it. Yet his inventory contains numerous copies of this same item. He tries to feign ignorance, claiming that it's just a stone used as an ornament in the East, and that he heard it's considered a valuable material in this region. With that, he offers to give her as many fire essences as she needs, awaiting her response. After this very tempting offer, the witch invites them to sit down and talk. She then introduces herself as the disciple of the Witch of Balance, Evelyn Lapisse. Responding to her introduction, Kim introduces himself again, followed by Scipia. But at that moment, Evelyn recognizes Scipia, referring to her as the girl from before, leaving Scipia curious. She asks if Scipia is the girl born with the power of the sun, which makes both of them anxious. Kim wonders how she could know that, suspecting that Rudens might have told her. Or perhaps the Shadow Witch is another member of the Order of the Sun. Evelyn tries to calm them down, saying she heard it from her master because the Witch of Balance is one of the 7 stars of Walpurgis Night, just like Rudens. Our protagonist is shocked by this information as he has no idea what Walpurgis Night is. Noticing their reaction, the witch realizes she needs to explain everything to them as she gazes at the fire essence. Kim understands what she wants and hands over the item, making her excited, declaring that there will be no returns. After that, she composes herself to explain what Walpurgis Night is. It turns out that it's the name of a secret group of 7 stars who share the same goal, making them the 7 most powerful devotees of the sun. Evelyn explains that her master and Rudens are part of this group, leading Kim to compare them to the 5 representative monsters of the game known as the Pentagram. But then he remembers that the Witch of Balance is also part of the Pentagram, wondering if the 7 stars in the Pentagram are separate groups. She continues her explanation, saying that although the power of the sun has been forgotten, its traces are hidden across the continent, and the mission of the 7 stars is to find them. With that, they created Walpurgis Night to share information about the sun's traces, prompting Kim to ask what they plan to do once they find them. The witch admits she's not entirely sure what the plan is, mentioning that her master used to say that the goal is to resurrect the sun and restore order. Our protagonist is amazed by this, realizing that their plan is to reverse the world controlled by Luna's church, which could lead to chaos in the game world. He realizes that the game system is guiding him down the path of the sun to assist the 7 stars. Even though not long ago he could never have imagined going against Luna's church, the protagonist notes that he's now working alongside a member of the Pentagram. When he considers if the other members of the 7 stars are on the same level as the Pentagram, he begins to think they could challenge Luna's church. Kim asks if there are more devotees of the sun among the witches, and Evelyn says she's not sure because they hide anything related to the sun. However, she acknowledges that all of her master's students dedicate everything to researching the power of the sun, making Kim understand why she cares so much about the fire essence. Kim then asks what Evelyn's current research is about, and she explains that she's trying to uncover the forgotten power of the sun from thousands of years ago. He recognizes her frustration, noting that she seems to have complaints despite continuing to assist in the research. Evelyn snaps, admitting that she's frustrated because she's only 26 years old and stuck in a research project where she has no idea where to begin searching. With that, she complains about her master's actions, not giving her more money for research or figuring out what she can or can't do, forcing her to lead orcs just to survive. Kim watches her outburst, remembering a graduate school colleague who often lamented their fate. At that moment, Scipia tries to ease the situation by asking if Evelyn's master might be doing this because she trusts her. Sepia's comment cheers Evelyn up, and she rushes to hug Sepia, saying that she's the youngest witch to earn the title of Shadow Witch. Trying to change the subject, Kim decides to ask if Evelyn could help awaken Sepia's power. Evelyn looks at Scipia and admits she's unsure, but then she takes Sepia's hands and attempts to analyze her powers. Evelyn asks if the power manifests when Scipia experiences strong emotions, and Scipia confirms, explaining that it activates when her life is in danger. She also says that whenever she uses this power, she loses consciousness, leading the witch to realize that it might be a stronger force than expected. Evelyn explains that she can't currently help them control this power, making Kim feel disheartened, though he had anticipated this response. However, she says she can help prevent Sepia from losing consciousness and going berserk, which grabs the protagonist's attention. Her plan is to use her shadow to create another consciousness for Sepia. Evoking her shadow to form a clone, Evelyn explains that her shadow is practically another personality with his own consciousness. The idea would be to give Sepia a second consciousness, so that when she uses her power, this consciousness would take control instead of her losing it. But Kim believes this could be dangerous, as it would be like having her controlled by someone else. Evelyn clarifies that it would still be Sepia, just with another personality. The concept involves tapping into one of Sepia's multiple personalities to manage her body. Our protagonist realizes that, although the situation is becoming complicated, this is a promising alternative as it would allow them to better utilize Sepia's power. Even so, Evelyn explains that even with consciousness control, Sepia still needs to learn how to manage her power and asks if she knows how to use magic. When Sepia says she doesn't, Evelyn notes that she should at least learn magical theory, though it might be impossible if she lacks the talent to handle mana. She explains that although mana exists in all beings, it's useless if Sepia doesn't have the talent to wield it. Sepia becomes worried and asks Evelyn to teach her how to use mana, hoping to demonstrate she has talent. Kim acknowledges that she has changed a lot since they left Libranos, now having a strong desire to learn. Evelyn agrees to try and she uses her powers to see if Sepia feels anything. But Sepia admits she doesn't feel anything, prompting Evelyn to try to keep her spirits up, saying it's normal at the beginning. Sepia then asks if she won't be able to use magic if she can't feel mana, and Evelyn confirms that feeling mana is the first step toward using magic. Even if she manages to sense mana, she might not be able to use magic immediately. Our protagonist asks if there's anything he can do to help them, but Evelyn explains that while there is a meditation technique that can help with sensing mana, it would take several months. Kim mentions that they can't stay that long, telling Sepia that they'll need to leave soon. At that moment, Sepia suddenly manages to concentrate her mana, summoning a massive flame around her. Both of them are stunned by Sepia's power, wondering how she managed to do it. Evelyn panics, wondering what they should do to control this power. In that moment, she notices her research materials catching fire, frantically yelling for them to put out the flames. Sepia asks how she could do that, while Evelyn only manages to lament over her ruined papers. Finally, she pulls out her staff and uses her spell Aquatic Cage to extinguish the fire. The problem is, in doing so, she ends up dousing Sepia as well to ensure all the flames are put out. After resolving the situation, Evelyn wonders aloud how Sepia could be using magic without even being able to detect mana. Kim questions whether it was truly magic, and Evelyn confirms that it is indeed magic, even though Sepia can't sense mana. She only feels the heat. At that moment, the witch becomes excited, speculating that it could be the ego of mana, something she had only heard about. Our protagonist asks if this means she won't be able to teach Sepia magic, but Evelyn clarifies that, on the contrary, it might actually be easier to teach her because of it. It turns out that if Sepia can understand the theory of magic, she could cast spells. With that, Kim realizes that Sepia's abilities are quite similar to those of a player. Even though players can't feel mana, they can still use magic. Noticing this, he realizes that Sepia will need to level up in order to use more powerful spells just like any other player. He asks how long it would take to teach her magic, and Evelyn says she can't be sure as it varies from person to person. Using herself as an example, she explains that it took her half a year to learn the basic theory. It worries Kim, even though she mentions that it was considered fast. The problem is that he has other tasks to complete and can't leave Sepia behind. However, Evelyn suggests that she could join them to help resolve this issue. Our protagonist is confused, asking what would happen to her research. Evelyn explains that since Sepia has the power of the sun, she should follow her to continue her research. Realizing this is a valid argument and noting that Evelyn is a trusted disciple of the Witch of Balance, Kim begins to think it might be a good idea. Evelyn assures him that she won't get in their way and could even be useful while observing and documenting things about Sepia. Kim then asks Sepia's opinion, and Sepia eagerly requests that Evelyn be her mentor and look after her. Sepia's request makes Evelyn blush, and she agrees, saying there's much to learn from the witch from this point forward. At that moment, Evelyn promises to do her best to teach Sepia, and Kim imagines that Evelyn is quite happy just to be called Master. Meanwhile, in the meeting room of the Seven Stars, one of the members becomes angry with Rudens, asking why he didn't speak up about what happened in their last meeting. Another member comments that Rudens has always been like this, further irritating the furious member, who says they can't just let it slide with that excuse. He demands to know where Rudens left the kids with the power of the sun, and Rudens replies that he sent them to Estellum. This answer enrages the angry member even more, as he accuses Rudens of sending them to die after waiting over 1,000 years for them to appear. The second member tells the angry one, Crassus, to calm down, reminding him that another member, Palsetto, has gone missing. Crassus raises his energy, summoning a bow and pointing it at Rudens, accusing him of sending the two to die despite them being a key to finding the power of the sun. However, the other member intervenes, telling Crassus not to attack Rudens as fights between the stars are forbidden. Crassus declares that his interpretation of the sun's meaning differs from Rudens and warns that he will go to Astellum. The two remaining members simply ignore his actions. Meanwhile, in Petunia, the protagonist's group continues their journey. Evelyn becomes excited at the sight of snow, prompting Kim to ask if it's her first time seeing it. She explains that witches rarely travel, as they could be burned at the stake if they're not careful. Evelyn further explains that only her master is capable of traveling safely, which reminds Kim that they wouldn't be able to escape the Inquisition easily. Stipia asks Kim if he isn't feeling cold, to which he responds that he's not feeling it much. After walking a bit more, they find a cave to shelter from the cold, and Kim plans to set up camp there. Excitedly, Sepia offers to make the campfire. She quickly gathers the materials and sets up the fire with impressive ease, which leaves Evelyn astonished. Our protagonist reflects on how much Sepia has grown during the 2 weeks they've been traveling with Evelyn, recognizing that despite everything, the witch truly is a genius. As Kim relaxes in the cave, he opens his status windows to review the missions he needs to complete while the two women rest. He wonders if the person Rudens asked them to find could be another member of the Seven Stars, and if that person is an NPC he already knows. Still, he decides to stop thinking about it, recalling that he had learned quite a bit while staring at a bottle. This bottle contained a potion that could be found in a hidden spot in the cave where they had stopped, and it was the reason Kim had asked them to stay there. The effect of the potion helps the protagonist recover the stats he lost after making the contract with Sepia. Just then, Sepia wakes up, asking if Kim had gone somewhere. He explains that he had searched the cave, and Evelyn mentions that she could have used her search magic. When Kim comments that she relies too much on magic, Evelyn responds that only those who don't use magic say such things. Although Sepia mentions that Kim can use magic, Evelyn still feels superior because she knows he cannot teach magic to his partner. Kim acknowledges that he can't, as he only uses his status window to cast spells. As Kim pulls several items from his inventory, the witch is surprised, thinking he can use subspace without an artifact. Our protagonist mentions that it's the magic of ones and zeros, which leaves Evelyn in shock. He gathers several arrows to give to Sepia, mentioning that they will soon arrive in Astellum, and asks her what she thinks they might need. Sepia isn't entirely sure, and Kim explains that they will need high-purity silver. Astellum is a city with a theme tied to Lumania, meaning there will be vampires there. Kim asks if the vampires are sun worshippers like Rudens, and Evelyn explains that there are various vampire factions, unlike witches. Because of this, the vampires who aren't Rudens' subordinates might be hostile toward them. But Kim points out that witches can also be hostile, which makes Evelyn grumble, saying witches don't usually harm humans. This makes Kim realize that she's warning them that the vampires may not be their allies. Evelyn asks why they need to spend silver to make weapons, and Kim asks if she doesn't know about the vampire's weakness. He explains that vampires die if struck by silver, which makes the witch nervous, hinting that witches might share a similar vulnerability. When they arrive in the city, Kim is puzzled to find a tomb right at the entrance. He asks Evelyn to use magic to disguise their appearance, since they are being hunted by Luna's church, and drawing attention could be dangerous. The witch excitedly uses her magic to transform them into siblings. However, Kim points out that they could still be recognized and suggests that they keep their hoods up. He mentions that their priority should be finding a place to stay before deciding what to do next. Evelyn becomes curious about northern food and immediately indulges until she's full. Afterwards, Sepia asks what they should do now, and Kim explains that they need to create new identities to avoid the church's persecution. He also suggests they change their names, and he imagines Evelyn won't be able to admit to others that she's a witch. Kim shows them his mercenary emblem, explaining that they could work to gather information. This idea excites Evelyn, while Sepia wonders if they should accept the requests. Kim explains that by taking on these jobs, they'll naturally blend in with the people of Astellum, while he plans to reach level 150 through these missions. However, two soldiers arrive at the location, making Kim uneasy. The soldiers begin discussing the Inquisitor's mission in Libranos and question the whereabouts of Sigmund. They mention that even Sigmund was taken by the Inquisitors, which causes Sepia to panic. Kim can only watch Sepia as they overhear the soldiers saying that anyone involved has become a wanted person. As the conversation continues, Kim stands up, telling Sepia that they need to leave the place. Once they leave the restaurant, Kim starts to worry, hoping Sigmund was able to handle the Inquisitors. Evelyn understands that they have been exposed to danger because of Rudens. Our protagonist wonders what Rudens was thinking, doing this after saying they were on the same side, trying to suppress his anger over having caused Luna's church to take action. The witch tries to calm the situation, saying there must be a reason for this, and Kim wonders if that reason is to make the game more challenging, as it had been too easy so far. Evelyn doesn't fully understand what he means, watching as Kim walks away. Upon arriving at the Astellum Mercenary Guild, Kim asks for the registration. The guild clerk asks them to place their hands on a crystal ball, which will assess their class, and also asks for the protagonist's name. At that moment, Kim invents a new name, introducing himself as Leo. Scipia is registered as a Class D and Evelyn as a Class C, which irritates the witch greatly. Afterward, the clerk shows them the notice board where they can pick up missions. They gather in front of the requests, and both Scipia and Evelyn are impressed by the variety of options. While Evelyn expects to take on a hunting request, Kim insists they take all the collection requests. The witch is stunned, asking if he knows how many of those there are. But Kim explains that he needs to visit a location and tells them to collect the items while he's away. Sepia notes that he's doing this again, suspecting that he must have a plan. In reality, Kim knows he doesn't need to gather the items as he already has everything he needs in his inventory. When they gather all the requests, the assistant is surprised, asking if they really intend to take on all those tasks. He warns them that even if they're very skilled, it would be extremely difficult to handle so many requests at once. He asks them to leave some for the other mercenaries who are clearly upset by their actions. Evelyn, feeling intimidated, tries to explain that they did take quite a few, but Scipia reassures her, saying not to worry, as Kim can handle it later. However, this prompts the clerk to threaten to call the guards. Just as things are getting tense, Kim returns and hands over a large sack, saying it contains all the items from the requests they took. When the sack opens to reveal the items, the clerk is left speechless. Kim asks how long it will take to process everything, prompting the clerk to apologize and send the other mercenaries back to work. At that point, he begins helping Kim finalize the details of the requests, while Evelyn acknowledges that everything worked out in the end. Back at the inn where they are staying, Kim collapses onto the bed, exhausted from the day's work. He overhears the girls discussing their plans to get frog skewers the next day, which makes Kim relax a little, thinking they sound like students on a field trip. He realizes he leveled up a lot that day and considers doing some training the next morning. However, a soldier approaches their inn, having received information about their whereabouts. This soldier is part of a group of thieves who are intrigued by the large amount of money they've heard Kim's group received. The group prepares to invade the girls and the protagonist's room simultaneously, intending to kill everyone. Although the bandits feel slightly guilty about having to kill two beautiful girls, they know it could be troublesome if they scream. Splitting up, the bandits move toward the windows to take out the group. They prepare for a coordinated attack coming down, but just before they finish the countdown, one of the bandits is struck in the head by a blade. Realizing they've been discovered, they rush into the attack. However, Kim is well prepared and quickly disposes of the two bandits targeting him. He shouts to his friends, asking if they're okay, and Evelyn replies that everything is fine as they observe the bodies of the defeated intruders. The witch is furious at the night invaders for ruining her sleep. Kim realizes they were just common thieves, but he's still impressed by Evelyn's power, remembering that she's a level 150 witch despite everything. Even so, Kim senses something and tells them not to lower their guard, making the two believe there may still be more bandits around. Our protagonist notices that something is approaching them, likely drawn by the smell of blood. Given that vampires and werewolves are extremely sensitive to the scent of blood, Kim grows concerned about which one they'll have to deal with. At that moment, someone approaches, surprising everyone. The figure is none other than the clerk from the mercenary guild, leading Kim to suspect that he might be a vampire who has been hiding among humans. However, the clerk simply says that he has something to ask of the protagonist. As the guild clerk approaches them, he assumes they already know his true identity. He introduces himself as Roberto, a vampire who hides among humans. Kim, curious, asks what he really wants. Roberto, looking disheartened, begins explaining that his request involves his master. It turns out that his master is a vampire who chose to coexist with humans, following a rule that forbids him from harming them. This causes his master to suffer from bloodlust during the full moon. To help his lord, Roberto collects blood from the Undertaker or directly from corpses during the full moon. One night, while smelling the bodies to extract more blood, Roberto discovered something far more special. Sepia becomes curious about this something special Roberto found. At that moment, Roberto points at Kim, stating that the special thing he found was the protagonist's blood, which causes Kim to grow concerned. The clerk explains that there's something very unique about Kim's blood, prompting him to make a request. He asks to extract a little of Kim's blood to help his master, but before he can proceed, Roberto is bound by a magical rope. Evelyn, suspicious of Roberto, demands that he stop lying to them, pointing out that she has never heard of a vampire coexisting with humans. Roberto falls to the ground, defeated, saying he cannot return to his master without the blood. This further irritates Evelyn, who warns him to be quiet before she stakes him. Kim, however, decides to hear Roberto out, asking more about his master. Still, Roberto says he cannot reveal much about his lore, but can arrange a meeting between them if he gets the blood. Evelyn is outraged, calling it madness, while Sepia urges her to calm down. Evelyn questions whether Kim actually believes the vampire's words, causing Kim to wonder how she could be so skeptical, given that she's a witch. At this moment, Kim realizes that for a vampire to call someone master, it must be a vampire lord, and there's a possibility that this could be the friend Rudens had mentioned. With that, Kim decides to view it as a simple blood donation followed by a meeting with the vampire lord. Kim asks where Roberto's master is, suspecting it's in a dangerous location. Roberto explains that his master is at the central camp in the Calic Forest and offers to guide them, though he admits it may not be entirely safe. Despite recognizing the danger, Kim agrees to follow him, which excites Roberto. However, Kim tells him to calm down as they'll notify him when they're ready to head to the camp. The protagonist group then gathers for a meeting, with Kim explaining that the location is dangerous because it's full of werewolves and vampires. The key point, though, is that the camp Roberto mentioned is unique. It's a peaceful area where the monsters have agreed not to fight. Sepia is confused and asks why they didn't head directly to the camp. Kim explains that since they're meeting a vampire lord, they can't show up in their current attire. The next day, Evelyn is thrilled with a mystic cloak that Kim gives her. He remarks that the cloak is much better than the rags she had been wearing, which irritates Evelyn. Afterward, he retrieves an item for Sepia from his inventory. The item is a void amulet, which has the special effect of nullifying a mortal blow. Sepia is excited about the gift, while Kim explains that it's a safety amulet she should always keep with her. Kim feels satisfied with how well prepared they are after distributing the items and asks if they're ready to leave. Soon, they arrive at the Calic Forest, where the origin of the area's monsters is traced back to humans. Due to an unfortunate accident, people transform into werewolves and vampires, causing them to be hunted and driven into the forest. As both species hunted humans, coexistence seemed impossible, leading to many conflicts and near destruction. To save their kind, they established the central camp in the forest. In the middle of the camp stands a cabin, which Roberto points out as his master's residence. Kim realizes that this is where the herbalist NPC lives, an extra NPC known to be very useful to players in various ways. This confirms that Roberto's master is indeed a vampire lord. At that moment, Kim reflects on how the NPCs he had often ignored while playing the game were hiding a wealth of important information. Roberto approaches the cabin, announcing to his master that he has brought guests. The door opens and an elderly man steps out, saying he was curious about the person with the special blood that Roberto would bring. He smiles, clearly pleased, noting that this is a most precious guest. As they enter the cabin, the master asks Roberto to prepare some tea. Kim wonders if Schubert was referring to Scipio when he mentioned a precious guest. At that moment, Schubert recognizes someone, stating that he had a familiar face among them. This excites Evelyn, who happily addresses him as Lord Schubert. Schubert confirms her greeting, remarking that she had grown a lot since the last time they met and inquiring about her master. Our protagonist begins to suspect that Schubert might be one of the 7 stars due to his familiarity with Evelyn's master. After they settle in the cabin, Schubert introduces himself to the group. He presents himself as Schubert Eisenhower and asks if they are Dio and Sepia, the ones Rudens mentioned to him. At that moment, he gazes at Sepia, noting that she resembles someone else with golden eyes and silver hair. Kim takes the opportunity to ask if Schubert is also one of the 7 stars, even that he seems to know both of them. Schubert confirms it, adding that despite missing some meetings, he still holds the position of a member. Kim apologizes, admitting that he finds it difficult to trust them. Roberto, clearly irritated by the protagonist's comment, is calmed by Schubert, who asks him to remain composed. The vampire lord says he understands Kim's suspicions since the group doesn't know much about the 7 stars. Kim apologizes for his reaction, explaining that Rudens had previously placed them in danger. At the same time, he reflects that he cannot be sure if the 7 stars would truly be allies, or if they simply want to manipulate them. As he thinks this, he notices a warning window indicating that he has encountered someone who knows the forgotten history and can unlock hidden powers. At that moment, he asks Schubert to explain the hidden power he had received. Schubert agrees, though he seems a bit concerned. Standing up, he states that he needs to verify if Kim is truly the key. This statement leaves Kim utterly confused. Kim asks what he must do to prove it to Schubert, assuming he needs to display some forgotten power. But Schubert shakes his head, stating that the protagonist is not yet wielding the power of the sun. Kim is taken aback by this remark. Schubert approaches a nearby stone and with a swift motion delivers a punch that begins to crack it. Kim realizes that Schubert is demonstrating his power, aware that such feats are typical for combat classes at level 300. Schubert calls Kim over to inspect the result of his punch, still leaving the protagonist bewildered. As Kim approaches, the stone completely crumbles into dust. Kim asks if that was the power of the sun, and Schubert asks if Kim could do something like that, with the protagonist admitting he isn't that strong yet. Then the Lord inquires if Kim is interested in wielding the power he just demonstrated. Kim realizes that if he trained with Schubert, he could wield the power of the sun, and the vampire Lord confirms that it's possible if Kim is indeed the key. Still puzzled by the concept of being the key, Kim wonders if this is related to the power he obtained from the Death Knight. But realizing it's not the time to dwell on it, Kim asks the Lord to teach him how to wield this power. Schubert, pleased, agrees, but first asks a favor in return. He explains that he still needs Kim's blood, revealing that the apostles are cursed, and that he is more affected than others as he loses control during each full moon. Kim finds it strange for a vampire to lose control during the full moon. Nevertheless, he agrees, stating that the group will stay for a while so they can learn the power. The vampire Lord then asks Evelyn about her master, and she mentions that her master is also a devout follower of the sun. With this in mind, Schubert accepts their request, noting that the theory behind his training might prove useful someday. He informs them that the training will begin the next day. The morning arrives and the group is served a large portion of vegetables, which frustrates Evelyn. Roberto criticizes her, saying she doesn't have to eat if she's going to complain. Evelyn protests that she's still weak because they took too much blood from them the day before. But when Schubert appears, asking if the food isn't to her taste, Evelyn is startled. Flustered, she quickly responds that everything is fine, and Kim notices that she knows how to behave in society after all. At the same time, Kim realizes that Schubert is a vegetarian vampire, wondering if that's the reason for his loss of control during the full moon. After breakfast, they gather to begin the training. The vampire lord mentions that he needs to assess the protagonist's specialty before they start the training. Kim draws his sword, accepting Schubert's request, and prepares to demonstrate his power. At that moment, he strikes a tree trunk, displaying his strength, while everyone watches. Feeling that it's still not enough, Kim readies himself for a second attack on the chopped pieces. After marking the pieces, he uses his magic to blow them up. Schubert seems impressed, and Evelyn comments that she didn't know Kim could do that. Kim humbly responds that this is all he knows how to do, and Schubert tells him that's enough for now. The vampire lord remarks that Kim's fighting style is nostalgic and asks if it's the style of Adelia Dark. Kim confirms, but asks who Adelia is. Schubert explains that Adelia was a powerful and elegant knight, the sword and shield of the sun, leading from the front lines of her army. However, Kim mentions that she too was cursed like the Seven Stars, becoming a death knight. With this, Schubert understands what happened and acknowledges that this is why they couldn't find her. Schubert explains that he is a martial artist who practices a fist-based combat style, making it difficult for him to teach sword techniques. Still, he knows he can at least help Kim unlock the power of the sun within him, believing Kim's familiarity with Adelia's skills will be an advantage. He adds that while the amount of mana used depends on talent, this doesn't apply to the power of the sun. Kim can access great strength even without magical talent. Evelyn, curious, asks why Kim can wield such power, and Schubert explains that the sun's power exists wherever there is light. The vampire lord explains that the power of the sun doesn't rely solely on the user's energy, but can also absorb external light to be utilized. Once the user absorbs enough of the sun's power, it can be unleashed. To demonstrate, Schubert gathers energy and fires a powerful light beam, showing how the energy can be used. Kim realizes that his own marks don't come close to this level of power. The protagonist comments that Schubert acts as if this ability is no big deal, to which the Lord replies that he will help Kim understand it better. Kim begins to grasp that despite the complicated path ahead, he needs to learn the power of the sun. 3 days pass since the training began, with Kim sitting in meditation in the forest. The problem is that despite following his master's instructions, he doesn't understand why he's doing it. Schubert had explained that Kim should meditate under the sunlight to help him feel the sun's power. Kim realizes there's little he can do except follow through with it. While deep in thought, he hears someone shouting nearby, calling for Sepia. His partner approaches, accompanied by Evelyn, both utterly exhausted. Evelyn remarks that Sepia has a lot of physical stamina, and Sepia confirms, mentioning that Kim had asked her to do endurance training. The two had just returned from a monster hunt, and Kim asks how many they managed to take down. Sepia shows him 2 items, saying they only hunted 2 monsters. At this, Evelyn throws a small tantrum, complaining that they nearly died because she wasn't able to use her shadow magic. To lift her spirits, Sepia tells her they managed to win thanks to Evelyn's help, making the witch feel a bit proud. Kim notes that the girls were also given restrictions in their training. Their guidance had been to focus on fire or light spells during combat, since the sun's power is always with them, even when hidden by the trees. The issue was that, with monsters in the region being at level 140, it posed a threat even to Evelyn, who was at level 150 due to her magic restrictions. Nonetheless, Kim trusts that Schubert would protect them if necessary. Sepia asks if Kim has made any progress in his training. Schubert's explanation had been that Kim's mark was a manifestation of the sun's power, and that understanding the principle behind it would lead to unlocking the sun's true power. Kim realizes that the mark's principle involves absorbing and releasing light. However, he believes Schubert's goal is to have him activate the mark without relying on the game's system. As he gazes at his system window, Kim notices that he has completed one of the conditions for evolution, while another remains hidden. Kim recognizes that he hasn't felt any major changes after training overnight, but he hopes to discover something once he completes the other condition. During dinner, Evelyn stuffs herself with food, irritating Roberto. Kim observes the two bickering as usual, while Schubert comments that they're both full of energy. Still, the vampire lord reminds them that they need to work together as followers of the sun. Kim, curious, asks why Schubert works as an herbalist. He mentions that the other stars lead factions, pointing out Rudens commanding the Golden Dawn and the Witch of Balance leading the witches. Schubert explains that having a faction is indeed useful for bringing back the sun, mentioning that he too once had many comrades. When Kim considers asking what happened, Schubert explains that it's due to his curse. Kim understands that Schubert's lack of control must be quite severe. While he's familiar with cases of vampires and werewolves losing control, he hadn't expected someone as powerful as Schubert to experience something similar. The Lord explains that before he was cursed, he was a monk practicing asceticism to empty his mind and ignore his desires. He shares that the creed he learned back then was to avoid harming others. Because of this, even after being cursed, Schubert chose not to hurt others, opting to live in a remote place. At this point, Kim realizes that the curse prevents Schubert from leading a group. The protagonist asks to hear more about Schubert's past, but the Lord says he'll reveal everything once Kim has learned to control the power of the sun. The difficulty, however, is that it's hard to feel a force one has never experienced before. Schubert remarks that Kim tends to overthink things, leaving him worried. It turns out that Kim knows so much that it complicates his thoughts. Schubert then uses sepia as an example, which surprises her. He mentions that she learns faster because she is like a blank slate, knowing little, and this makes her wonder if that's a compliment. Just then, Sepia shares that she felt a warm energy the previous day. Kim notes that he's been aware of Sepia's incredible talent for some time and she has always impressed him. The Lord then asks Kim if he understood why he was asked to meditate in the forest. When Kim responds that it's because he lacks the talent to feel energy, Schubert tells him he's wrong, reminding him that he just said Kim thinks too much. Kim realizes that the Lord is trying to say that he has too many trivial thoughts. Ever since Kim got trapped in this world, he's never been able to clear his mind, and now he figures he needs to try to let go of those thoughts for a moment. Meanwhile, in a nearby town, a soldier demands drinks. The soldier is Galetto Houndgestus, an inquisitor who appreciates how well the northern cities know how to brew alcohol. He muses that this is the one good part about being sent north, while the other soldiers grow annoyed at the racket he's making. At the same time, two men discuss the disappearance of two people, assuming they had chosen the wrong side. One man's friend asks what the group of mercenaries who took all the marked missions could do against those two. Hearing this, Galetto becomes interested and asks where the mercenaries they're talking about can be found. Back in the forest, a loud noise echoes through the trees, worrying Sepia. A group of werewolves charges at Kim, who is sitting in meditation. Schubert's words still trouble him as Kim always relied on the game's system when using abilities. As a werewolf lunges at him, Kim lands a direct strike, cutting the creature's arm. Kim notices that his mark didn't activate and the werewolf turns on him, forcing Kim to dodge. Regaining his stance, Kim realizes he should recall the power of the sun that Schubert demonstrated. But in doing so, he neglects the second werewolf, narrowly avoiding a strike from behind. The werewolf swings its other arm to attack, making Kim worried. He knows he could resolve this easily if he used his abilities. Our protagonist fends off the werewolf with his sword, positioning himself between the two enemies. Evelyn grows concerned for Kim, asking if they should help, while Sepia watches quietly. She knows she needs to trust Kim. The battle with the werewolves continues, with Kim defending himself using his sword, all the while trying to ignore the game's strategies to find a way to use the sun's power. Kim remembers that the Lord said he should meditate under the sun to feel the power. With that in mind, he rushes past the werewolf, striking a tree behind it. After cutting the tree, he feels the sunlight reaching him, making him feel ready to fight, saying he'll try again. In that moment, Kim's sword begins to glow with a bright light. Our protagonist charges at the werewolf, landing a powerful blow that impresses his companions. However, Kim ends up shocked, dropping his sword on the ground still in front of his enemy. Evelyn panics, asking why he dropped his sword. Sepia thinks about helping him until she notices that Kim is getting into a battle stance with his bare hands while a glowing aura surrounds him. Kim lands a direct punch to the werewolf's stomach, leaving him stunned, and immediately after, Kim points his glowing fingers before snapping them. This move makes the werewolf explode entirely from the waist up. His power turns out to be so strong that it creates a huge pillar of fire that impresses his companions. Sepia recognizes that it was the same power Schubert had used, saying that Kim had managed to acquire the power of the sun. Our protagonist receives a notification that the hidden condition was fulfilled at the same time he gains more trust from Sepia. He feels happy to realize that the condition was unlocked, noticing that he had managed to capture the power of the sun. Even so, the condition indicated that he had only achieved part of it, making him wonder if he should be satisfied with at least half of it. His friends approach to congratulate him, while Kim notices that Sepia might have been very worried that he wasn't able to awaken his power. When he intends to ask how their training went, a huge light appears in his chest. Kim feels as if something is squeezing his heart, imagining that it could be a side effect of the sun's power. At that moment, he ends up coughing up blood and passes out, leaving the two in despair. Then we see a scene of a nun praying to a statue of a goddess. The nun asks her goddess to send a hero when a disaster happens. Meanwhile, Kim wakes up being greeted by Sepia and Schubert, relieved. Our protagonist is concerned about how long he was asleep. They explain that Kim had been unconscious for half a day, which relieves him a little. Schubert smiles, saying that Kim had managed to understand the power of the sun. But he quickly warns the protagonist that he had overdone it, and it could be dangerous if he doesn't learn to control that power. Kim mentions that he is confident he can increase his familiarity with this power now that he understands it. However, this irritates Schubert, who asks if he plans to run just because he has learned to walk, saying that this power isn't something that can be mastered so easily. This scares Kim, who says that he will keep that warning in mind. Taking advantage of the moment, Kim asks Schubert to tell him about the past, remembering that he had promised to share what happened 1,000 years ago. Schubert warns that, although he can tell, he wants to first explain about him being the key. But as soon as he intends to start telling, his eyes widen and he stares outside his house. Our protagonist becomes worried about Schubert's behavior. The Lord turns around, ordering them not to leave that room while his eyes glow red. When he looks at Roberto and Evelyn, the Lord orders both of them to enter the room as well, making Roberto concerned. But Schubert yells at Roberto to go in quickly, completely out of control. Someone starts knocking on the door, making Kim curious about who could be there at that time of night. At that moment, the door explodes and Kim steps in front of Sepia to protect her. Then the soldier appears with a smile, saying that he had invaded the house because he thought it was an empty house. He introduces himself as Galetto, asking if Schubert was the owner of the place. Kim recognizes Galetto because he is one of the 5 swords of Luna, wondering why he was there. It turns out that Galetto had joined the church to fight strong opponents and not out of religious piety. Our protagonist wonders if his pseudonym, Monty, should not have left such a strong impression on the church, questioning why he was there. Evelyn gets irritated, asking who he thought he was, while Schubert orders her to go back to the room and stay hidden. She even tries to respond, and Schubert orders her to go quickly, while he goes to talk to Galetto. Schubert approaches, saying he didn't know why he was receiving a guest, as he was just an herbalist, explaining that if he needed herbs, he should come back later. But Galetto starts laughing hysterically and says he just needs him to hand over a few people. He explains that he can sense the strange energy of the other young people who were hiding. At that moment, he grabs Schubert by the neck, asking if he would ignore him if he pretended to be human. Roberto gets irritated and charges at Galetto, trying to save Schubert. However, the soldier merely lands a blow that knocks Roberto out. Evelyn prepares a shadow arrow spell against Galetto, who watches her from afar. But like Roberto, her magic is easily blocked by the soldier. Galetto gets excited, recognizing that there were vampires and a witch, saying that he didn't plan to work after going to that place. At that moment, Schubert begins to shine intensely, which makes him curious. As Schubert prepares to retaliate, Galetto gets excited, saying that this should feel like a real fight. He throws Schubert against the wall, leaving him severely injured and worrying Kim. The Lord orders Kim to gather everyone and flee, while he holds off the soldier for as long as possible. Kim worries about the Lord, and Schubert mentions that he wouldn't be defeated so easily, even though he is so old. Schubert tells him to go quickly, leaving everything in the protagonist's hands. With that, Kim grabs Sepia's hands and orders Evelyn to carry Roberto so they can escape. Even though she asked about Schubert, Kim tells her to worry about that after they escape. At that moment, the house simply explodes from the battle between the two. The group watches the house engulfed in flames, with Sepia asking who that man was, prompting Kim to explain about Galetto. Sepia becomes concerned, imagining that someone of that level was pursuing them, wondering if Schubert would be okay. Although Evelyn wants to go back to help, Kim warns her that if she goes back, she'll die instantly. She complains to the protagonist, asking if he expects them to just abandon Schubert. But then, Kim tells both of them to stay behind while he goes back to help Schubert. Meanwhile, Schubert continues to take a beating from Galetto, who recognizes that he is a vampire lord. The problem is that Galetto acknowledges he had sensed a much stronger power. Even so, he gives up fighting and prepares a final blow to get rid of Schubert. But at that moment, someone catches Galetto's attention. Our protagonist appears at the doorway, asking if he wouldn't prefer to play with him instead of the Lord. Galetto tries to dismiss the protagonist, but Kim provokes him, asking if he didn't seem good enough. At that moment, Galetto starts laughing again, emitting intense energy, saying that a man must face things head-on. Schubert grabs Galetto's leg, telling Kim to leave. Kim tells the Lord to rest for a moment, just as Galetto punches him to free himself from Schubert. With that, Galetto takes a fighting stance, asking the protagonist to show his skills as he would face him at his level. Our protagonist becomes excited, throwing daggers to hit him from a distance. But Galetto easily dodges them before counterattacking. What he didn't expect was that the daggers were marked by the protagonist, allowing them to explode beside him. Kim realizes that wouldn't be enough to hurt him and charges at Galetto. However, as he approaches, he sees Galetto's fist heading toward his face. Our protagonist manages to dodge at the last second, realizing that Galetto had anticipated his move. Taking advantage of Galetto's attack, Kim lands a strike to his neck, trying to knock him out. The problem is that it's not enough, forcing Kim to use his sword to defend himself from the soldier's blow. Kim pulls out a pouch and pours a liquid over himself, allowing the protagonist to incinerate Galetto entirely with the help of the liquid. Then the protagonist mentions that it was a bag of oil produced by mages, which is much more flammable than regular oil. Despite thinking that this would finish the soldier, Galetto's hand emerges from the flames, grabbing Kim by the neck. Galetto walks out of the fire, saying it was the first time he had experienced such a fight. He punches Kim in the chest, causing significant damage. The soldier tells Kim to keep things interesting for a little longer. Our protagonist recognizes the damage from that blow as he notices an HP alert below 50%. Although he knew there was no way to win that fight, Kim insisted on it because he knew that Galetto never kills players. That's because even when a low-level player passed by him, the most that would happen is that Galetto would try to fight without ever killing them. If the player ended up showing potential to become stronger, Galetto would let them go. With that, Kim imagines that if he shows a strong power, it might help by evoking his fire power. When the protagonist evokes his power, it excites Galetto. Our protagonist starts concentrating more and more energy, trying to surpass the power he had used before, learning the skill Lunar Fang that pierces the skies. His strike destroys everything in its path as it heads toward the soldier. With that blow, Kim starts bleeding again as a side effect of his ability, leaving him kneeling, hoping that the attack would affect the soldier. After being hit by the attack, Galeto stands still, observing the protagonist. Then Kim imagines that he had affected him far less than expected. Even so, he believes that it would be enough to make Galeto want to let him go, hoping he could return much stronger. But Galeto says it's a shame because he believes Kim could truly become more powerful. Kim notices that Galeto's reaction was different, realizing it's because Kim is currently an apostle of the sun, not just a normal player. Understanding this, he realizes he needs to find a way to escape that place. At that moment, his chest burns again, causing Kim to cough up blood, which ends up flowing towards Schubert. After absorbing a lot of Kim's blood, the Lord starts being covered by intense energy. Our protagonist realizes that this was blood magic, while Galeto turns to the Lord again, wondering what would happen. Schubert rises with a strong aura, transforming into an animal form. With that, Schubert transforms into a golden wolf. Meanwhile, Sepia hears Schubert's howl and becomes worried about them. Evelyn recognizes that this howl was much stronger than that of a regular werewolf. The problem is that Evelyn notices that werewolves were gathering near the house. A group of werewolves surrounds the house and charges at Galeto, but this only excites him further as he faces the werewolves, saying things were getting more interesting. He throws one werewolf against another, taking out two in a single blow. Our protagonist realizes that Schubert was both a vampire lord and a lycanthrope. This explains to him why Schubert had so much trouble with his lack of control, while Galeto takes care of the werewolves summoned by the Lord. When Kim thinks about fleeing, one of the werewolves charges at him, but a strike hits the werewolf, saving the protagonist. At that moment, he realizes it was thanks to Evelyn, who tells him to pull himself together. Evelyn extends her hand, saying that the werewolves could sense the shadow disguise she was using. Kim asks about their companions, and Evelyn explains that she used a spell to protect them. The witch asked about Schubert, and Kim explains that he seems to have gone mad because of his blood. Then, a werewolf falls in front of them, startling Evelyn. Meanwhile, Galeto remains excited, fighting the werewolves and saying he can't see an end to it. Because of this, he uses an ability, stomping on the ground and preparing a strike against it. His attack completely destroys the ground, hitting the nearby werewolves and getting rid of all of them. With that, he feels calmer after finishing off the werewolves. But then he notices that Schubert was still standing, watching him. Galeto realizes that if he doesn't take things seriously, he might end up in trouble, prompting him to prepare for a fight with Schubert. The soldier charges at the Lord, who blocks his blow, grabbing the soldier's fist. Schubert stares at Galeto, who becomes excited, saying that this would be a real fight. However, at that moment, Schubert strikes him directly with his claws, making Galeto even more thrilled. Suddenly, Galeto is thrown out of the house, managing to land on the ground a few meters away. He acknowledges that he was too careless in this fight, realizing it was the first time he faced such a powerful monster. The Lord charges at Galeto, trying to strike him with his claws again, while the soldier defends himself from the attacks. Schubert continues attacking Galeto, who keeps defending. As he prepares another attack, the soldier finds an opening to grab Schubert, planning to counter. With that, Galeto manages to suplex the Lord, finally knocking him down. Even so, Schubert grabs Galeto's wrist, impressing him as he watches the werewolf rise again in front of him. At that moment, Schubert lands a blow that knocks Galeto to the ground. The Lord remains out of control, watching the protagonist's group as they try to flee from him. Kim realizes that this is the strength of one of the members of the Seven Stars, understanding why Schubert was concerned about his lack of control. At that moment, with Schubert transformed and out of control, not even his allies would be safe. Evelyn wonders what they should do, seeing that Schubert was staring at them. Our protagonist remembers that Schubert's speed is so superior that they wouldn't be able to escape, saying they must find a way to quench the Lord's bloodlust. Sepia becomes worried, knowing that Schubert seems strange. As they turn, they see Schubert holding his head in pain before letting out a loud scream. Kim recognizes that the Lord was trying to regain his sanity. Once again, Kim's chest starts to burn, worrying Evelyn. At that moment, Kim remembers his wounds and broken bones from the battle. He imagines that even though it's dangerous, this could be their chance. Sepia becomes concerned, while Kim says they need to bring Schubert back. The group gets excited to help the protagonist bring Schubert back, making Kim happy. At that moment, Sepia notices that it has started to rain, causing Kim to realize that this would hinder his fight. Evelyn is impressed, pointing to something ahead of them. A slim figure approaches the group, revealing itself to be Crassus. The witch prepares to face the potential new enemy. Our protagonist recognizes the man as he pulls out a golden bow. Crassus aims an arrow at Schubert, who is still writhing in pain. He shoots an arrow at the Lord, who is then struck by lightning. After that, the man watches as the Lord gradually shrinks, asking if it worked. Schubert returns to his human form, saying that he feels better thanks to his friend. The archer asks what he means by feeling better now, making Kim and Sepia worried. He approaches the protagonist, asking if he is the key, and hints that even though they need to talk, it wouldn't be wise to do so in that place. When Kim asks where they are going, Crassus mentions that they should head to the Walpurgis Night. Meanwhile, a mage is furious with his ally who was killed while trying to reach the 7th circle. One of his subordinates asks what they should do, while the mage recalls that his ally Victor had a sacrifice, who was the sister of a famous knight. He asks where the girl is, and his subordinate mentions that she is likely traveling with a mercenary who killed Victor. With that, the mage orders them to find them as soon as possible to avoid being found by the followers of the moon. Back to the protagonist group, he remembers the moment Crassus freed Schubert from his loss of control, recalling that when he recognized him, he could rest. Our protagonist sits on a bed, realizing that he is in the place where the 7 stars gather. Evelyn explains that they are in Temburg, where the Walpurgis Night takes place. Kim thinks he should thank Crassus later while receiving a glass of water from Roberto. He asks how long he's been asleep and is shocked to hear it's been 2 weeks. Roberto explains that Kim overused the power of the sun and was in very bad shape as a result. Our protagonist imagines he suffered from mana exhaustion, while Roberto explains that they would need a month of treatment. With that, Kim understands that Schubert helped them despite being completely worn out, wondering if he should buy him a gift, while Evelyn mentions that she also helped. Even so, the protagonist remembers that Crassus is a member of the pentagram who burned the world tree. It turns out that he burned the world tree, stripping the elves, who were considered the strongest race, of their power, making him the mortal enemy of the elves. This information makes him realize that even though they were saved by him, they still couldn't fully trust Crassus. At that moment, Kim becomes worried about Scipia, who wasn't there. Evelyn explains that she stepped out for a moment due to her treatment, making Kim even more concerned. He checks his information window to ensure that she is at least nearby. With that, he notices that Scipia reached level 150, leaving him impressed. Our protagonist becomes curious as to how she reached level 150 in just 2 weeks. This takes us back 2 weeks, with Evelyn arriving in Temburg with a group. Scipia asks if that's where the Walpurgis Night takes place, and Evelyn confirms, saying that the entire mountain is Temburg. Crassus warns them not to let their guard down yet, as they're not there to have fun while carrying Kim. At that moment, Scipia thanks him for saving them, and Crassus asks if she's the girl Rudens had mentioned. The problem is that Scipia feels guilty for not being useful in that fight, making her ask Crassus to teach her how to become stronger. With that, Crassus asks why he should go out of his way to fulfill her request. Even so, he mentions that she shouldn't blame herself too much because no matter how strong she could become, it would still be pointless. But Scipia stands in front of him, saying that it was because of her power that they went out of their way to rescue her. She quickly adds that she doesn't intend to be reduced to a mere tool in the hands of the 7 stars, ordering him to help her so she can at least gain his trust. To provoke him, she asks if he is incapable of making a human girl strong, saying that perhaps she was asking too much of him. Crassus gets excited, worrying Evelyn when he orders the two to take Kim to the top of the mountain. After that, he tells Scipia to follow him up the mountain. Back in the present, Kim is impressed by Scipia's boldness, believing that Crassus must have put her through intense training to achieve level 150. Realizing that she was training on her own, he decides to focus on his own stats. With that, he opens his window and notices a new skill called Island. Our protagonist realizes that after evolving his abilities, the power of the sun had been added to it, making him think he should experiment with his new skill a bit more. He continues checking his stats and notices that he has reached level 200, remembering that he was at level 140 when he was fighting the vampires and werewolves in the forest. Kim checks his message log, trying to understand how he gained so much experience, wondering if Galetto is dead. However, back at Schubert's house, Galetto is buried under snow. Eventually, he awakens, fully recovered, but with a headache. Next to him lies a necklace, which he recognizes as an artifact from the saint that had prevented him from dying. At that moment, he remembers the moment he was defeated by Schubert, feeling excited. He begins laughing hysterically, saying that for the first time in his life, he had lost a fight. Galetto remembers Schubert, saying he eagerly awaits their next encounter, as he will make sure to kill him next time.